Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or night, depending on what part of the world you're in. Happy Juneteenth to all of those that are in YouTube land, Facebook land, and I will say across the globe. I think we all should be celebrating it today. I don't know if you guys are like me when it comes to the knowledge of it. I didn't learn much about it until my late 30s. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but at the same time, you know, it's all about transparency over here. We have an amazing guest today, and I won't do a lot of talking. I'm going to let him do the talking because he knows the subject. And I am the student, and I encourage you guys to be the student with me as well. Yesterday, we had a few conversations, and one of the conversations included the millennials and them getting taking the torch and going forward. And I am happy to say that our guest is a millennial who is grabbing the torch and taking it forward. So what I'm going to do today, which is not regular, however, we need this, how do you call it, just to get them up, if you don't mind. I'm going to introduce you to Professor Anthony Pratcher II. But I'm going to do it in J. Wilson and Dr. Passa J fashion after the 30. Hi, Anthony, Dr. Anthony.
Hello.
I want to make sure that our guests can hear you well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for doing this for me today. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your student. I always consider myself a student of yours when you are around or when I'm in your presence. I try to soak up everything that you have to offer, just because I want to do my part too to make things better. So today we're talking about Juneteenth, freedom. What's this song says? Freedom, 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 freedom. Yes. And so I know people like to say free-ish. And we had a few conversations yesterday that were quite live, quite good, that I actually enjoyed. And it was just, yeah. So the floor is yours. I can't thank you enough. I do want to let everybody know that his Cash App is scrolling across the bottom if you want to bless him for the knowledge that he's going to drop today. And I will do my best to try to, run this video again a couple of times today, a couple of times tomorrow, just to, hey, get it out there, right? All right, Anthony, the floor is yours. I am going to, let's see, can I do this? No, I don't want to do that. I want you to have full screen, but I don't want to too much go away. But I'll just put you off front. I can still hear, if that works for you.
Yeah.
Hold on. Wait a minute, dadgummit. No. It keeps making you small and me big. I don't want to be big. I want to be small.
You know, it's up to you. I'm okay with sharing the stage with you.
I really want you to have it though. I mean,
okay.
I ain't got nothing to say to the people. Let me get over here to these comments though. Hey, Murdate. Hi, Angie B. Happy Juneteenth. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She said, I just learned about it too, not too long ago, and I live in Texas. Good morning, Mike. You can see the comments on from your side, if you go to comments, you'll see private chat and then you'll see chat. Okay, and so you can see the comments as well. Right now we have 3 from YouTube, 1 from Facebook, but don't worry, it'll get views. Yeah, so it's all yours.
All right, cool. Thank you, cousin. I'm so excited to be here today, have the opportunity to talk with y'all, have the opportunity to visit this show. I've been watching on and off for a while intermittently. And I'm just always excited when I get an opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned. For me, I think if I had to sort of, how am I trying to say this? I'm having feelings about Juneteenth. I sure am.
Boy, where's Eastern Bread when I need her?
Because it snuck up on me. I didn't expect for this whole federal holiday thing to happen. You know, I was working on Thursday and I plan on doing some work on Friday. And then I remembered all of a sudden, I'm like, technically this is a holiday now, like for real. So I had to switch my whole routine up so I could really lean into this. Yeah, so we could celebrate appropriately.
Soak it in, yeah. I refused to celebrate it yesterday. I was like, nope. I mean, I get that it's the national holiday today, but no, it's happening tomorrow. So yeah,
exactly. Today is the day. Today is the day. And so it's kind of with that sense of ambivalence that I'm going to have this presentation for you all. As wonderful and symbolic as Juneteenth is, obviously there's more work that needs to be done. And I think by understanding the history of the Juneteenth holiday, it gives us a sense of, one, what it means for this holiday to be recognized nationally and federally now. And two, it allows us to understand what that may mean to us and what we need to do to continue to protect our ancestors' legacy. Because really, that's what this is all about. It's very nice to have dates recognized, have events recognized by the federal government, but we're here for each other. And so we need to know this so that we can understand how to best celebrate ourselves and each other. Okay.
I figured out how to give you the full screen. I'm going to remove, but I think I can still operate the comments by removing myself. So I got you.
All right. So I put together a very brief PowerPoint for y'all. And I'm just going to share this screen. I don't know why it makes me feel like so weird when I do it, but we're going to make this happen. All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? I'm assuming that we all can. So let's just get this show on the road. Okay. So Juneteenth. To understand Juneteenth, and we'll start at the end. So Juneteenth occurs June 19th, 1865. Union General arrives in Galveston, Texas, and reads a script, basically announcing the Emancipation Proclamation. At this point, everybody knew that President Lincoln had, as we say, freed the slaves, that he had emancipated enslaved people in areas under rebellion. But Texas, being the furthest region west in the Confederacy, had not fallen under Union control, and therefore enslaved people were not able to be freed by the Union Army until June 19th, 1865, well after the hostilities have ended in other parts of the country, well after the war in many ways had been settled, even after President Lincoln had been assassinated. But when the Union Army arrives in Texas, they have an announcement, and on that day, the enslaved people living in Galveston in particular, but across Texas, finally are able to celebrate the fact that they are freed from the bondage that their ancestors had been forced into. So to understand Juneteenth and to understand where it's coming from, we then have to go back to this idea of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was a belief that Anglo-Americans had developed during the early 19th century. It was basically the idea that the entire American continent was theirs to be sovereign over, that from sea to shining sea, as we may say, from coast to coast, this was supposed to be land that was theirs for the taking. The thing about manifest destiny, however, is that you wind up seeing there's 2 different ways that Anglo settlers want to manifest their destiny. You have some, generally from the South, who want to move westward, and take their enslaved people with them. And then you have those who want to move westward, generally from the North, and they want to exclude enslaved people from the land that they're conquering. This is known as the tension between free labor and slave labor. These are 2 different types of political economies that would eventually wind up being proven that they couldn't, cohabitate together. But during the 1840s in particular, expansionists, pro-slavery expansionists and free labor expansionists joined forces to conquer much of the Western United States in the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War has its roots in the Texas Secession, the first Texas Secession, when Anglo settlers seceded from Mexico in 1836. This is where the famous, remember the Alamo cry comes from. Well, one of the things that happens in Texas, Anglo settlers first start moving there in around, I want to say 1821 with Sam Houston and Austin, the Austin family. What winds up happening is in 1829, Mexico concludes its War of Independence from Spain. And at the end of the War of Independence, they emancipate enslaved people. They abolish slavery within Mexico. So these Anglo settlers who had come, from the United States, they weren't expecting this. They expected, and they had brought their enslaved people with them. So it takes a little bit of time. In 1836, they leave the nation of Mexico and create the Republic of Texas to protect their enslaved property. Around a decade later, there's the Texas annexation, where Texas joins the United States, and the United States engages in a war of imperialist aggression against Mexico, conquers Arizona, what is now Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, California, much of what we identify now as the American West. And these states are annexed into the United States. Okay, so this matters for us because this leads to some really critical federal legislation, leading with the Compromise of 1850. Prior to 1850, there had been a sort of legal détente between free states and slave states, meaning that if you think of something like the Underground Railroad, enslaved people really just had to go to a place where they were no longer legally able to be enslaved if they wanted their freedom. Harriet Tubman, as an example, she escapes to Philadelphia as a way to get her freedom out of Maryland. Frederick Douglass is another example. He moseys his way up to Rochester along the Great Lakes and is able to reside there prior to 1850, because at that point, while there were certainly people who were kidnapping and taking escaped slaves, escaped African Americans back into slavery, and even kidnapping free blacks and taking them into slavery, the Compromise of 1850, which is what allows California and the West, the American West, to join the United States, makes it a federal crime to abet enslaved people trying to escape bondage. Moreover, it incentivizes judges and incentivizes the entire legal system to find escaped African Americans and take them back into slavery. And so in this moment, it becomes even more critical then for folks who are trying to escape bondage to leave the United States. It no longer becomes possible to feel or to have safety within the United States. And so you have thousands of people, thousands of folks who leave the US and go to Canada as a way to escape kidnappers seeking to take them back south. But you also have thousands, tens of thousands really, of African Americans who travel to Mexico and live in Mexico for years. There's one town, Nacimiento de los Negros. It's in northern Mexico, and it's essentially a town comprised of escaped enslaved people. Furthermore, you can get into 1857, you have the Scott v. Stanford case. So the Dred Scott case, the reason this is so important is because Judge Taney at the time, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he says that white men essentially, that African Americans have no rights that white men are bound to respect. Meaning that you can kidnap, you can kill, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to take people's testimony at trial. You can essentially, African Americans, whether they're enslaved or not, by the time of the Civil War, are facing a civic death in the United States. There's few voting rights. People can be kidnapped without recourse. Obviously, there's just employment discrimination. It's difficult to find places to live. There are people who are almost hiding out away from a dominant community that's seeking to exploit them almost at any point in time. But as I say, the origins of Juneteenth, they really come from manifest destiny, because these free labor and slave labor colonizers, these really aggressive expansionists who want to see the United States grow, they can't come into an agreement on what type of political economy is going to exist in the territories. So while all of this really violent and scary oppression is going on. It's pushing people to Mexico, pushing folks up to Canada. At the same time, the white folks are having a falling out amongst each other. And so in 1861, when the southern states decide to leave the United States, this leads to a very rapid federal emancipation that occurs over the next 4 years, essentially. So we think of Juneteenth, as I said, 1865. The first federal Emancipatory Act really is April 16th, 1862, with emancipation in DC, where slave owners were paid to emancipate enslaved people living in Washington, D.C. So when we talk about reparations today, what's really interesting is that in Washington, D.C., slave owners, say, for example, Georgetown University, because they are currently reckoning with their history of slavery. Slave owners were compensated to free people who they previously had in bondage. Because after the South secedes and leaves the United States, Northern legislators, they find slavery to be repugnant. There's other types of exploitation perhaps they're okay with, but they cannot support slavery. And so they wind up abolishing slavery within the District of Columbia. Mind you, this does not end slavery in any other northern state that has it, meaning that slavery is still legal in Maryland, which is right across the DC border, but is no longer legal in Washington, DC. In September of 1862, you have the Emancipation Proclamation. We normally think of this as occurring on January 1st, 1863, but it was after the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, when you have a Southern army finally advancing north and trying to conquer northern regions, that President Lincoln, he feels confident that he has to put the slavery question on the table. Prior to this time, the war between the states was really being fought, at least in public discourse, over the idea of union or disunion. Can we split up the country or can't we split up the country? You have the abolitionists who are primarily in the North, and you have the pro-slavery folks who are primarily in the South. And they're having a discursive battle, certainly amongst each other. But until that time, until the Emancipation Proclamation, the question of slavery is one that the federal government in particular, President Lincoln, did not want to address. But after realizing that he needed the North to have a moral high ground, especially since Southern troops were finally invading northern areas and really, gaining sympathy among the northern population, President Lincoln says that of January 1st, 1863, and he signs in September of 1862. So he gives them, 3 months head time, 13 weeks. He says, enslaved people who are living in areas of active rebellion will be freed. What does that mean? That means that enslaved people in the Confederacy, in the Southern states, essentially in areas that President Lincoln doesn't actually have control over, because they have seceded from the United States and said that they're no longer under the sovereignty of the federal government. But enslaved people in those areas would be freed if their owners remained in rebellion. What does that mean then for enslaved people in states like Kentucky or Delaware or Maryland, slave states that remained in the Union? The Emancipation Proclamation does not free them. But as we know, the war continues. And so as of January 1st, 1863, enslaved people held by rebellious owners were freed by order of the Union Army. What you wind up seeing after this point in 1863, 64, and 1865 is that enslaved African Americans en masse decide that they are going to cast their lot with the Union. Prior to this time, it was sort of, we're not sure if we can trust either of these folks. You would have people who would try to leave Southern plantations or try to leave Southern owners, run to the Union Army, and be sent back, given back to the people who are enslaving them. This also is something that happened in New Orleans. New Orleans falls to the Union troops in 1862. And so since it's not seen as under a state of rebellion in 1863, despite the fact that Louisiana is still part of the Confederacy, enslaved people in the city of New Orleans are kept in bondage because they're not owned by people who are in a state of rebellion. But African Americans en masse, they run to the Union Army and say, we will help, we will join, men, women, children across the board. What can we do to free other people who are being held in bondage? This is why Harriet Tubman is the best example. She has the, Lord forgive me for forgetting the name right now, but she has a raid. She hosts a raid in South Carolina. She frees, I believe, 750 people by leading a military raid. And so, what we wind up seeing then is that in the Low Country, they're producing food, they're, providing raw materials for the Confederacy to survive. And when someone gives them the opportunity to find freedom, people quit working for the Confederacy and run in droves by the hundreds to figure out how they can join the Union and support their emancipation efforts. So we get to the 13th Amendment, which is the 13th Amendment. It's passed in 1865. So, by this time, the Civil War is winding down and will conclude in the next couple of months. And so many people have been freed across the country. In fact, this is just a quick and important, I think, note that 200,000 African Americans serve in the Union Army during the Civil War. By the time you get to 1865, outside of Richmond, the Battle of Richmond, that was the capital of the Confederacy, things along those lines, upwards of 30% of the troops in the Union Army are African American. So in many ways, by joining the Union, African Americans were able to, at least those held by in states of rebellion and with rebellious owners, were able to accrue their freedom. The 13th Amendment, though, abolishes slavery for everyone, whether they're in a state that's under rebellion or not. It takes a couple of times before this legislation is passed, but on February 1st, President Lincoln signs it and sends this legislation to the different states in the Union at the time so that they can legislate the emancipation of all enslaved people, regardless of race, or previous servitude, I think is the way that it's described. And that's what gets us to Juneteenth. So June 19th, 1865 is the date when people in Texas are freed, because Texas is a state that's under rebellion. They're not freed by the 13th Amendment. They're freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And certainly it's something that we need to celebrate. But if we're celebrating true emancipation, I know that there's going to be, I'm just going to bring it up, some people who are, there's questions to this day. There's a debate on how effective the 13th Amendment was in freeing people, if it did or did not end slavery. But what I would say is that the 13th Amendment isn't even ratified until December 18th of 1865. And so until that day, the state of Kentucky and the state of Delaware continued to allow slavery within their states, meaning that enslaved people in Kentucky and Delaware are actually the last ones to be freed, not enslaved Texans. It's not until the 13th Amendment is ratified that enslaved people across the United States are free. So, long story short, Juneteenth is a really important holiday for us as African Americans. It represents, in many ways, the culmination of our efforts to help the Union Army and to help the United States abolish slavery, especially in the southern states. But when we start thinking of it as part of a broader liberation movement, we have to remember that all of us weren't free in this country until much later, much after Juneteenth. The Juneteenth, in many ways, is a celebration of a Union victory over the Confederacy, which is, thank you, the Combahee Ferry Raid. I forgot about that. But Juneteenth is a celebration of a Union victory over the Confederacy. And the benefit of that is that our ancestors collectively were liberated due to a Union victory. But all of us were not freed by this Union victory. It took the 13th Amendment to end enslavement, even in northern states. So while Juneteenth is the date that we're going to celebrate because it represents the efforts of our ancestors to join a force for good at the time, a force that was seeking to free people, it's not the only date that we need to have on our calendar. And so that's where I would say it's a great federal holiday, but Juneteenth is a date that we should associate with the federal government because it really has to do with their victory over the Confederacy. December 18th, it's before Kwanzaa, it's before Christmas. It's not really a date that we celebrate. It's not something that's big on our calendar, but that's really the day when all of us were free. So that's Juneteenth in a nutshell. That's the history behind it. Any questions that y'all have? Let me go and start looking at the comments. Ooh, a lot of comments. Okay.
myself. December 18th of what year is
1865. That's when the 13th Amendment was finally ratified. Yeah. And so to answer your question, Aisha, yes, in DC, slave owners were paid to let enslaved people go. So they did get reparations. They were paid for the loss of their property. But no, we haven't gotten that same type of recognition, but I think that's because it's not seen in some folks' eyes the same way. But this is why when we talk about reparations, we should not forget that slave owners receive reparations for emancipation. If they can get it, I just don't see why the people who actually own their own labor and the descendants of those people shouldn't get it as well.
Wow. Wow. I feel like T's TV. She said, wow, I didn't know that. Neither did I. Crystal says, good morning, Dr. Pratcher and hosts. Dre says, were there any radical or huge movements that took place in Delaware or Kentucky?
So what I've seen, Kentucky is an interesting place because Ohio's right across the river. By the time of the Civil War, Kentucky was not one of the leading slave states. It had a relatively, so it's not like Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. It doesn't have a large Black population. It's relatively small. By that time, enslaved people were held, a lot of them were held in urban centers. So places like Lexington, Louisville, they were urban workers. Isn't the same type of plantation culture in Kentucky. Certainly there's, farms, there's plantations, that kind of way. But I'm thinking more of, when I think of bluegrass, I do think of horses. So you'd have folks who are ranching. You'd have folks who are engaged in crops along those lines. You'd also have a lot of smaller farmers. They wouldn't necessarily have the same size of plantations as you would find in the deeper South. So slavery operated differently in Kentucky than in other parts of the country. Same thing with Delaware. Delaware is part of the mid-Atlantic. So Delaware has more in common with a place like Maryland or even Virginia, say, than a place like Georgia or even Tennessee. Delaware is a really small state. And even at that time, it was a backwater. It makes it so remarkable because our current president is from Delaware. But what I saw, at least when I was looking at Maryland, is that as emancipation is occurring, what you wind up seeing is a push toward apprenticeship. So what I mean by that is that you have all these kids, and when their owners realize that emancipation is going to occur, they all of a sudden go and sign them up to be their apprentice. Meaning if you apprentice someone, you effectively can have them work for you until they turn 21, meaning that they move from one system of coercive labor to another. Delaware, though, being just back in the cut like that, this isn't to say that folks weren't trying to emancipate themselves. It's more so to say that there were a lot of forces in place that allowed slavery to continue there in ways that it couldn't, even in nearby states like Maryland, up until, well after the Civil War concluded.
So in our community, especially now in this generation, more so than like our parents' generation, trades are almost frowned upon. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's because the younger generation learned this particular information and was like, you know what? Nah, it's like a form of slavery to me almost. I don't want to be a mechanic. I don't want to take up a trade. I want to go to a 4-year college and get me a degree. And do you get what I'm saying? We're technically still in trades and apprenticeships now. You can make just as much money as a doctor or anybody else if you're doing
without the debt.
Yeah, definitely without the debt. Yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
I would say there's a way that, so Booker T. Washington, obviously, he was really big into the idea of trades. And I think trades are valuable for our community. The question with trade, and this is sort of a free labor idea, right? If we go back to the 19th century, what they mean when they said free labor, the idea is that you expand the country so that as people learn these skills, they can just move westward and start new communities where they can be leaders. Because one of the things that we wind up seeing, even with trades, it becomes this question of how do you move from being an apprentice to a journeyman to a master craftsman, or a master craftsman really to an owner of the means of production. Meaning you can learn a trade, you can be a carpenter, right? But can you own a carpentry company? You can learn to be an auto mechanic, but can you own a mechanical, can you own a body shop? And I think that's one of the problems that folks are seeing. And that's one, I just flat out, racism in hiring, it continues to this day. So while these trades are important to have, and I mean, they're really critical for the development of a nation, I think that as individuals, African Americans just started looking and making decisions and said, the best life that I could live for myself is by getting the education necessary to join a corporate community, to join a corporate field, as opposed to having the skills that allow me to develop work for myself. That's just where we're at right now. But, just because that's where we're at right now, hopefully that's not where we're at in the future. I do think we'll get back to learning more trades because we just have to.
Yes, because it's easy to say support Black businesses, but then if you don't have Black owners, then what is there to support? Got a couple of more questions. CeeLo says, Dr. Pratcher, do you think that now it's a federal holiday that it will increase the conversation and teachings with school districts?
I hope so. I really hope so. But I think that's what makes this one so interesting, because it's in the summer. So it's very easy in that sort of way to avoid. We have our segment on not just the 4th of July, but, the revolution. Like we're 3rd, 5th, 8th, and I think 11th grade. Like we're going to go over it time and time again. So it becomes a question of how does the Civil War and how does emancipation, how does it get integrated into that broader curriculum? I think there's two ways of looking at it. There's certainly folks who are like, American history, African American history is separate. Obviously, that's not accurate. But I'm not sure that Juneteenth will if it's presented as a sort of second Independence Day thing. I honestly think that's a disservice to our ancestors, because what I'm trying to put together in this presentation is that it wasn't. So in places perhaps where we're trying to celebrate the federal government and the way in which the federal government brought freedom to people, I could certainly see it being highlighted and promoted. And something that's really put forth. But in places, places that were under rebellion, where Juneteenth might be a sore subject to some of the folks who lost their property, I'm not sure that they may be as receptive to it. And I just don't know if that's necessarily the battle we need to fight. What we need to do is make sure that, not just because it's a federal holiday, but we need to make sure that we have our own calendar. Let these other folks figure out what their calendars are going to be. And now it's a federal holiday. It's just another excuse for us to shoot off fireworks. I'm really happy I get to shoot off fireworks basically 2 weeks back to back. That's how I'm looking.
I have a different mindset about that, because I've yet to find someone here that I don't want to say it in a way that isn't politically correct, but majority of the people that sell fireworks here doesn't look like me. And I don't mind supporting. But then another thing my sister-in-law said one day, God is just etched in my brain. She said, I don't buy fireworks. She said, to me, that's like taking a $20 bill and just lighting it up. And I was like, dang, why'd you have to say it like that? And we spend so much money on those things. Yeah. Tease TV said, wow, paid for the loss of Black people. How sick. Pandy's hair care. Hi. Thank you for coming in. Happy Juneteenth. AW says, what do you think the proper talking points are in order to help push for legislation of critical race theory thinking? Ooh, this above it's above me now. I'm taking notes.
I remember one of the things I read is that if your child is being introduced to CRT, it means that they're either in graduate school or law school, because that's really where these things are coming out of, I mean, CRT it's very old. CRT is, it predates me. Critical race theory goes back to the 80s and 90s. And you got to understand, in higher ed at the time in the academy, there was this real push towards theory, that coming out of the 60s and 70s with the social revolution, people were like, we don't have scholarship that reflects the inequalities that we're seeing. So people started developing theories to reflect the things that were going on. And critical race theory is essentially just a way of understanding how race operates across space and time. You theorize it. When it comes to thinking of what the proper talking points are to push this legislation, when I say I don't know, I think it's because even within the academy, right, within higher ed, critical race theory, it flourished in the 90s, and it sort of went out of vogue in the aughts and early teens, as collectively we made I don't want to say a move towards assimilation, but there stopped being such a nationalist tilt especially to say Black studies programs, ethnic studies programs, so on and so forth. Because what CRT really does, it from what I understand, it's allowing folks to see all these different racial groups, all these different histories, not necessarily as part of different national histories, but as different subsects of American history, and seeing how they relate to each other and seeing how they intersect, talking about the power inequalities and disparities across communities. But it does not necessarily empower people within communities to see who they are. And it does not create, how shall I say it, a sort of universal narrative that, you know, and we're all Americans in this together. It doesn't necessarily do either of those things. So when it comes to legislation for it, I think it becomes a question of what do you want your children to be taught about American history? How do you want them to be taught about American history? And, you know, for us as folks, how do we want to relate to American history? Because I think that's part of the reason why I'm kind of like iffy about all this stuff, because I'm not quite sure this CRT thing is really like, while it's about us, I'm not sure it's by us necessarily. And if it's not by us, then I'm not going to say it's for us. We need to, and I'll just keep saying it, we need to do things that are for ourselves. We need to have our own calendars. We need to have our own sense of what we're doing. It would be great if CRT was taught in schools. In Arizona, they actually banned ethnic studies at this secondary level out here. You couldn't teach it until you got to college. And fortunately, that ban was overturned. Ethnic studies has been a really great thing for our students, I think. But that was because the school districts that put it into place had a set, they grounded what they were doing within the community. You know, it was Mexican Americans in Tucson who were teaching Mexican American students about being Mexican American. The way that we're going to teach CRT, I'm not sure that I would want an Anglo student in a predominantly Anglo school district teaching my Black child about critical race theory, because you're going to get it not just from their perspective, but in what they think race is supposed to mean to them. We have to remember that critical race theory isn't going to teach us about who we are to each other. And that's still the most important thing, who we are to each other as Black people.
Mm-hmm. That brought me to, and I'm trying to look at another, this is a post that was by the BBK, and she shared it from Instagram. And she said, Tennessee is now following suit of Texas, and that is stopping funding to schools that try and teach about our Black ancestors' accomplishments and fights that were lost and won. Have you heard about that?
I have not. Honestly, I've been trying not to pay too much attention. There's way too much negative news going on. But I think that's one of the things I was taught. If you expect the schools to teach your children, they're not going to get educated. And it's not that schools don't educate. It's just they're going to educate your children based on what they want your kids to know. So as much as we need, you know, our schools teaching CRT, as I said, I'm not sure that when it comes to the history of our people, regardless, public, private, charter, I'm not sure that the school system is ever the way to get all of it. When it comes, though, I would say to teaching everybody, I do think that critical race theory is important. If anything, I was going to say this has more to do with white folks not wanting to learn about themselves. And that's not something that I think is while I hope that they would take the time to do that, I'm not sure that I'm interested in fighting that battle. But this is
the first time I've actually heard the term critical race theory. So I'll definitely research it more. I do have a question, because this made me think about, yesterday was my first time hearing the term slave postpartum disorder. I hope I'm saying it right. No, I'm sorry. Slave post-traumatic stress disorder being passed down to generations. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard some. There's definitely, just from what I know, if you look at some medical stuff, part of the reason why there may be greater incidences of certain diseases, especially within the Black community, it's genetic in the sense that some of these genetic patterns or some of these genetic traits can be traced to malnutrition, overwork, and not even just, you know, traumas that people saw. I mean, traumas that people endured, starvation, physical abuse and torture, things along those lines. You know, it changes the makeup of your body, and that can be passed down. There's practices that occurred during slavery that have been passed down, especially when we think of violence within our community and violence that we commit against each other. I don't think we necessarily collectively came from the continent with that. That's 200 years of seasoning. So there's things that we've learned from slavery that continue to affect us to this day. That's not what I got my degree in, but I do think that when you start looking at it and just, start putting two and two together, it makes sense that these things can be hereditary. Yeah. I guess the question is how much weight we want to give to it, but the way that it was taught to me is that it's about multiplication. It's not A plus B equals C, but it's more A times B equals C. So these things are going to vary for people across space and time. But I do think that, these legacies are all things that we're living with.
And I also think that it's how can I say it? I'll give this example because I don't have the right way to say it, but think about me and grandma and granddaddy, like encompassing me and raising me and pouring into me. And then keep in mind that grandma was raised by her grandma, granddaddy was raised by his grandma. And then, so them sharing that love. And then I have that same love when it comes to children that aren't mine and wanting to see them protected. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, that feeling of being abandoned or left alone. And so you don't want anybody else to feel that feeling, but it's not necessarily tied to what happened to my grandparents more so than my own experience. You get what I'm saying? But it's still, each experience continues to go forward. Does that make sense?
Well, just because these things are repetitive, we're repeating practices. And I really do mean this, like diet in particular. Like, it's not so much that our diets haven't changed, but a lot of the things that we take as staples, Southern food, everybody eats greens, right? I just don't know people don't eat greens.
Necessary.
Yeah, but there's a difference between like being able to eat greens now and however you prepare them, whether it's with a specific type of meat, how much salt you do or don't use, And it's like folks who were only able to get pot liquor because they weren't able, like nobody gave them food. You have some, you go back and you read some of these records, you have some folks who are like, well, that person had a bad master because they were not feeding them. Even on the same plantation, depending on who owned specific people, some folks might get meat, some folks might not. And so, those type of nutritional deficits are kind of what I mean when I say there's genetic changes that can be heightened or taken down over time, multi-generationally, because of the diets that people had. And moreover, the practices then that we have, like the type of greens that we're eating, because, it wasn't until I think I had options that I learned to eat different types of greens, pair different types of greens. But the types of options that we have, behaviors that we have are kind of limited by what we know. So when, as you said, you basically can go back from your grandparents to their grandparents, that gets us to the 1870s. So it's really not that far away, these practices that we're talking about. It's only 5 generations. And if we're all growing in the same spaces, people aren't changing too much over that time. So it's the practices we have and the genetic changes that our bodies or that our ancestors experienced that are putting us in these positions to have to manage, just some different types of chronic conditions.
Yes, there are more questions. Are you comfortable with answering questions if I were to drop down the link?
Absolutely.
Okay. CeeLo says, and Dr. Pratcher, to your knowledge, are there large clusters of Black people in Mexico, in Canada? In Canada in the early 1900s. Were there large clusters? Yeah.
There's in Canada, from what I remember, I thought it was a lot of folks over in Nova Scotia. So it was people, they're primarily Eastern Canada. It's not like British Columbia and all that, but Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, there were some African-American communities over there. They're never huge. And they were also in Canada, they were at the margins of society, but they continue to exist well into the 20th century of emancipated African-Americans. And it's the same thing with Mexico. So in Mexico, they have a different history with enslavement. Most of people who were enslaved by Spanish colonizers, they actually wind up on the Pacific coast. In fact, the second president of Mexico was Guerrero. He was Afro descendant. And Guerrero, the state of Guerrero, is in southwestern Mexico. It's near the Pacific coast. So if you go to the Pacific coast, you're going to find Afro descendant communities that are indigenously Mexican, like they've been there for hundreds of years. In northern Mexico, Sonora, Chihuahua, so on and so forth, there were some smaller communities of escaped African Americans. Many of them actually go back to the north, or not to the north, but go back to the United States after the Civil War. The other thing that you'll wind up seeing then is, instead of seeing clusters, you'll see a lot of individuals who, it's, men or women, who would go, they'd marry someone who was Mexican, they would integrate into Mexican society. So there's still some towns, obviously, where there's folks, but in northern Mexico, you don't have the same presence of Africans or people of African descent as you would in southern Mexico.
And do they do the same, like, African American? So are they saying African Hispanic or?
Afro-Mexicans are, when I say they're different, I really mean it's like they came at a different time and they have a different relationship with their colonizers than African Americans do. So when you think of people who are leaving Texas, say in the 1820s, 1830s, if they come back 40 or 50 years later, there isn't as big of a gap versus Afro-Mexicans who just, if they come to the United States, that would be their first time perhaps having left that part of the globe for hundreds of 100, 200 years. It's just, they're different communities. I think that's the best way of saying it. Mm-hmm. And because they're different communities, even though we're part of the same diaspora, we're going to engage with these states differently.
Okay. Dre says, never been to Delaware before. What is the culture like?
I'll tell you a story about Delaware. I think that's the best way I can do it. I was taking the bus from DC to Philly, and Wilmington is on the way. I got out in Wilmington. I was so confused because I thought I was in Philadelphia. And I just started looking around. I'm like, this doesn't feel big enough. And I got back on the bus before we left. So I think, that idea of it being a countrified city, like, that's a very good way of saying it's a small state. It doesn't really have, from what I understand, corporate taxes. It does have HBCUs. There's certainly a Black community there. It's just quiet. It's small and it's quiet. And because of that, a lot of folks will wind up moseying their way to the larger cities because there'll be more opportunities there. But there's definitely, it's not a lot of folks, but there's folks who have their ancestral homes in Delaware. And so once you get outside the city, it winds up being very rural. A lot of, agricultural factories, agricultural production. Kind of looks like Maryland's Eastern Shore in that sort of sense. So that's what I know about Delaware today.
Crystal says, I think it depends on your parents. My father-in-law is 81 years old and grew up sharecropping. He has several trades, which he taught his sons, but also a degree from JSU and a master's from U of M. Gone, Daddy. You got a good father-in-law. Tell him you got some cousins that need some guidance. Dre says, what way or how should it be celebrated and recognized? And can I add to that something that I said this yesterday, and I'm probably gonna get called all type of stuff for saying it now. But the whole basis of this page is about a safe place for the uncomfortable but necessary conversations. And I want to be transparent. I just want to be able to say what I want to say. I ain't got to worry about being censored or canceled. I ain't nobody to cancel. But not only that, it's about leaving, for me, a digital imprint, a virtual imprint, a hard imprint for my descendants. So I made the statement yesterday when we were talking about Juneteenth, and especially with, not knowing how to feel, because I don't even know how to feel. And I was like, I can honestly see other people saying, Black folk just ain't never satisfied. But at the same time, what does satisfaction look like for us? Do you get what I'm saying? Because I heard someone say yesterday in reference to our ancestors, why didn't they do more? Why weren't they more aggressive? And then in my mind, I'm thinking, if they did more, some of us probably wouldn't be here because our ancestors would have been dead, And so I honestly believe we are born, we're supposed to be born, because I am rebellious at heart. I've tamed that, but you tell me no, I'm a figure out, yes, And God is showing me that in my youngest child now. And there's no way really to, I hadn't figured out how to tame that in her. So what do you say to that? How do we, because I still feel this is something that should be celebrated. Okay, yeah, no, it's not reparations. And let's also talk about reparations. Just put a comma there, because I'm concerned about the reparations that the Holocaust survivors received. Not because they received it, because the Holocaust was horrible, but because the U.S. took it on. And so that's another, let's talk about that at another time, but put a bookmark there. So how do we get to a place of, as a culture? Because for me, things that I say is, 1, I'm not oppressed. I am not oppressed. 2, I have power. 3, knowledge is power. And that's why I make it my business to learn this system. This system may not have been created for me. However, in order for me to make a change or abolish, I have to know the system. But in knowing those things, oftentimes I get called a coon. I get called, Lord, what was the other one? It's my people that turn on me, not the others that I'm seeking information from and trying to understand so I can bring it back to my community. It's typically my community that's coming for me. So I'd like Dre's question to be answered, especially for somebody like me who really, I'm very much pro-Black, and I had to say this yesterday, but I'm not anti-white. And the statement was made, well, why do we have to make sure that white people know you're not anti-white? No, I don't say that for white people. I say that for my people so they can understand I'm pro-Black, but I ain't with you if we're about to go do a whole, let's tear down this whole white community and blow it up. And no, that's not, you know what I'm saying? Like, I believe in diversity. I believe in equity. I believe that in order for all of us to get a step ahead, we gotta work together. And then the last part to add to that is, and we can put a bookmark here too if you want to do it, because it's June and we can do it next Saturday, but the LGBTQIA plus community and Black people. Like, we're the hardest on them, yet we should be the ones that understand the struggle. So that was a lot. So go ahead.
I think, so the way, I always say it this way, the way the game was taught to me, it was by this organizer. He said, you have inside, outside, and against strategies. And I think, if we look at let me tell you what I mean. When you're dealing with systems, you either work inside that system to change it, you work outside of that system to put pressure on it, or you work against that system by burning it down. And when we look at the dominant community, the dominant nation in this country, you have white folks who work inside of politics. You have white folks who are, who work outside of politics. You have white people who go and take over the Capitol. And at the end of the day, and this is why the Civil War was such an important point for us, because generally they can come to some type of consensus about the way they're going to operate, because it's like, what's in the best interest of, be it the nation or the people or something, and so on and so forth. Like, eventually there's some type of consensus where it's like, let's all go back to making money and doing what we want to do. But it's in that moment where it's like, I cannot agree with you, and I'm going to start using the tactics that we've used against people that we're conquering against other white folks. That's when we have historically had an opportunity. So similarly, I would say we probably need folks who are working in a system and outside of a system and against it. And the question is, how do we make peace with all those people? That's why I understand what you mean when you're saying you're pro-Black and not anti-white. And that means that folks who are organizing in that, in a way that you're not going to organize, then y'all need to organize on that way. But the question is, what can we organize around? And that's why I think, these type of celebrations are important, Juneteenth in particular, because regardless, and it doesn't matter, because it's a date that celebrates the federal government having a victory over the Confederacy, and all the enslaved people who were held by the Confederates were freed by the federal government by June 19th, 1865. They were able to deliver on their promise. I think it's something worth celebrating, but largely because the African Americans, our ancestors, collectively, when it came down to it, they were like, we can work for these Southerners, We can work for these Northerners. And they collectively chose to join the Union Army and figure out how many former slave owners they could kill. Collectively, that's what they chose. I'm
going to go back up just to because if you could just give me a little bit more information about this, because this was the first time that I heard about Harriet Tubman leading raid. So that when I went to get it, because I just typed in what you said, because I didn't know the name. And
the Combahee Ferry raid, it's a huge,
and the way it was described, Lord, I'm trying to put it back up here for the people so they can. But let me describe it to you. The way they described it, it says on June 2nd, and I'm using this. It's a school blog, a college blog, but MMAAHC.
The Smithsonian from the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Bless your heart. That's what it is. It says on June 2nd, 1863, Harriet Tubman, under the command of Union Colonel James Montgomery, became the first woman to lead a major military operation in the United States when she and 150 African American Union soldiers rescued more than 700 slaves in the Combahee. Am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Combahee Ferry raid during the Civil War. For me, I was like, what? Like, because all I ever heard about was the Underground Railroad. But here we're talking about, no, this wasn't underground. This was, hey, let's go. And this was a woman in such a time as that leading troops.
And so I would say it this way to answer Dre's question. I think we need to come together and celebrate that type of stuff. You know, and when I say that's why we need to know our history, because Juneteenth, if you really think about it, we are passive actors in Juneteenth. Some dude comes and reads a proclamation and everybody celebrates versus the Combahee River raid, where this one who's already over 20 years has gotten 300 people out of slavery and in one day frees more people in one day than in the last 20 years that she had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And so what we need to do, I would say, is take these dates that are set aside. They may be set aside, you know, by the federal government. They may be set aside by the state. They're set aside, but use them as times to come together and not just enjoy each other's company, but regale each other with tales to remind each other about who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. Because it's by having those conversations with each other, by coming into communion, into unity in that way, that we can figure out how to align those of us who are working inside, outside, and against specific systems, so that we can work together regardless of our orientation, but for the collective liberation of our people.
Absolutely. Crystal said, shoot off fireworks. LOL, my husband Derek agrees with you. Tease TV says, you teaching today, doctor. Dre says, I think it's also a situation where some younger white individuals not wanting to be held accountable for their ancestors. It's a mindset of, I don't practice what they taught or believed in. Can I make a response before you address that? I have an issue with holding people accountable for something they didn't do. Does that make sense? So, in vice versa, I don't want to be held accountable for something that I didn't do, i.e., yes, I'm Black, yes, I'm a woman with a fro, but I'm not a criminal, I'm not a thug. Do you see what I'm saying? And so how do we balance that out? Because I can understand being defended. And also, I don't want a white person coming to me apologizing for what their grandparents do. Like,
they can give me some money, though.
You know, so go ahead.
Nah, they can give me some money, though.
I mean, I'll take the change. I was one of those that was like, I don't have to have reparations. Just leave my granddaddy's property alone. And now that I found out about this environmental racism and that could be it ain't no that could be. I'm about 90-something% sure that's why my mother is no longer here with me. No, I want my granddaddy's reparations, my grandmama's, my mama's, my brothers that, and all my uncles that don't want it if they don't want it. Anybody that don't want it, I want it.
And I think that's kind of the point, you know, when we're talking about slavery PTSD, that it's like, we're still living with this stuff. And you know what? So are they. Because there are a lot of people who have inherited, like I remember this one story I heard, what is it about Southern Belles at Ole Miss, and it's like you can tell how much land their fathers own based on the number of pearls they have on their necklace, something like that.
Wow.
You know, it's like these are old, just they have their culture in that kind of way. But like, just another story. One of my friends, his wife was like, well, my family didn't immigrate here until like the 1880s. So what does this have to do with me? And I mean, in many ways, she's right. Mm-hmm. Her ancestors weren't here. They didn't do any of this stuff. But we have to remember, and this is something that does come out of critical race theory, the idea of identity or race as property. I was thinking about this as I was on my walk this morning, that right now, all this stuff about voting, it's really a question of what is the property that citizenship gives us? If we think of the Civil War as a conflict over what type of property can you hold? Can you hold property in other people? Is slave property something that will be acknowledged in the United States? This question over citizenship is, what is the value of your vote? How valuable is your vote? Like, what does that property actually give you? And so if you read Cheryl Harris, Whiteness is Property, I was very convinced by that. And that's a foundational text, I think, in CRT. I don't want to speak something that's inaccurate, so forgive me if it's wrong, but she basically lays out the way that whiteness not just enables you to do things, but I mean, it has monetary, pecuniary benefits in the sense of what people are able to get paid, in the sense of access that people have to specific opportunities, in the way that it just changes your life. And so when we talk about folks not wanting to be held accountable, or the mindset of like, I'm not this or I'm not that, or even more so when we talk about like, well, I don't know if I feel like people should be giving me something, or what are we going to do if we got it, and da. We have to remember that we've inherited, for better or worse, the blessings and the curses that were often given to our parents. We can hang up all this stuff on the cross, but we're still living with it. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, but we need help managing diabetes, but we need help of, not even just affording homes, but having a place to live. We need help being able to survive and sustain and develop our community in this country. And that's why it's like reparations isn't just about, well, it is give us what you owe us, but it's really make us whole again. And we have to look within first to do that. But I think this is where you were saying about the stuff with the Holocaust, that it shows the way that it really is about political power that gets the federal government to make a move. Because if you can get money for something that didn't happen in this country, but you can't get money for something that they actively co-sponsored, they're just going to say, no, take the holiday instead. That has to do with the amount of political power we have. And that's why I said it's the voting question. It's what is the property of citizenship? Because African Americans are across the board, we're pretty much citizens. A lot of folks aren't, but like we are. And they're just since the end of the Civil War, the primary impetus of white supremacists is to figure out how to reduce the value of our citizenship so that we can't make claims like the descendants of Holocaust survivors. Because if we could, it's not just, what we would do to the country, it's that they would no longer have the power to control our lives. And we would have the power really to chart a better future for ourselves. And I would argue the rest of the globe.
Wow. That was a great answer. Hi, Mr. Fulton, and thank you so much for the raid. I appreciate you. I pray that you're getting something from this. Crystal says, in college, I recall seeing a picture of a slave owner licking the face of a slave to test the salt from his skin. More salt, more sweat, the ability to work in heat and endure it. Wow.
That's crazy.
Good morning, Katrina. Thank you for coming in. Then years later, we have high blood pressure and other health issues due to diet. Absolutely. I struggle with having a balanced diet. Like even when I go to the store to purchase food for our family, I struggle with, they say shop the outside, not the inside. But then I see these things that I've never even eaten before, or different fruits that I've never tried, or vegetables that things I didn't know about. The moringa, hopefully I'm saying that right, seed is something that April introduced me to. And like, I struggle with it, but I do it because she introduced me to it. And then the fact that it makes my water taste sweet. It's like, how did something like this how do we not know about these things? And so I am happy that we are learning about different things now, like the moringa seeds, sea moss. I have a vitamin that I just got, the I'm gonna mess it up, ashwagandha, something, but it's supposed to be natural and help with your energy and stress and all of that. And what Juneteenth holiday celebration, what are some things that you would suggest to us as a people? One, to celebrate, but to also incorporate to do better. Do you get what I'm saying? Because what good is celebrating Juneteenth if we're about to go out here and put this big pork belly on a grill with, with all the sauces and the marinades, and because you know how we celebrate. We're gonna go to the liquor store, mind your business, worry about your mama. Just me talking to the other people, because we're gonna go to the liquor store anyway on a regular day, but we really gonna go to the liquor store on a holiday, because we got to celebrate, and we got to celebrate together. What are some positive, not saying that those things are negative, they're not negative, unless you're addicted to them. But what are some positive things that we can start to incorporate for our children? Because what I don't want, and I have my kids watching, so they can't say they didn't know, is them to be in their late 30s learning about Juneteenth, or for me, even June 2nd. I need to celebrate June 2nd. I don't know what we're gonna call that, but I need to celebrate June 2nd, December 18th. I'm with you on this calendar. Let's go get together. Let's get it started, okay? Let's make this calendar, and then it's up to us to pass it on. But what are some ideas that you would have for that?
I think so it becomes a question. It's like, is it corny to read books? Is it corny to watch documentaries? Is it corny? Like, is history corny? That's kind of the question. It's not, and it doesn't have to be, but that's not generally how we celebrate. What I found, though, and this is my experience kind of, and it doesn't really get to what you're getting at, but I really do believe in communion, and I believe in oral storytelling.
Yes.
We have, and this is me, that because I grew up in Arizona, and so I traveled to Memphis almost as just like a pilgrimage. I'm going to an ancestral homeland, and when I get there, I'm trying to soak up all the game I can, because not just because it's a different culture, but it's a different perspective that allows me to understand who I am and how I should navigate when I go back to the other places that I'm generally at. And so when I think of Juneteenth, part of the reason I wanted to share these stories is to help put things in perspective. And that's what the oral storytelling does. Our grandmother, one of the things she said to me, I can't remember when it was. Obama was in office, and she said something was really chill. Kind of.
I just got chills. A picture of her. I don't know if you saw the picture of her at the voting booth.
I didn't. I would love to see
Anthony got that picture. Yes. Yeah, that's like amazing. Or even taking my mother. Like, I get a joy taking my mother. She's 92. I get a joy taking her to the to go vote. I just learned that my brother can vote. Like, just things that we didn't know. Like, yes, my brother has an intellectual disability. Yes, his cognitive ability, they say, is about 7 years old, but he's an adult and the laws affect him, so he can vote. I didn't know that. I just learned that.
And I think those are the things that we need to, on days like today, on days like Juneteenth, and we can talk about the different habits, like, well, what should we be eating? What should we be drinking? All those kind of things. But at the end of the day, we have to tell each other our stories so that we know where we're coming from. And we need to find out we need to celebrate each other. That's what I would say. And so I'm trying to think of, I look at our family, I suppose that is what we're doing today. But celebrating the successes that folks have, celebrating the things that have happened in the past, and really taking the time to remember that, because that's when I talk about, that's the reason I want to bring up the Combahee River Raid, because it's like that mattered. Like, we need to remember that it was a Black woman who was the first American woman to lead a military expedition. We need to know that, because it does. And when we know that, when folks go into the military and someone tries to say something to you sideways, you remember, like, but this is mine too. And that's supposed to be the purpose of these celebrations, to remind us what is ours. So anything we can do that's going to remind us this is ours, not just something that's going to distract us, not because I am going to watch hoops this weekend, but it's not about hoops. It's not about the food. It's not about fireworks. It's about the stories, because the stories, that's our legacy. Our history is our legacy. And any opportunity we get to share that with each other and make sure that everybody knows and everybody remembers, that's what we should be doing on these days.
Yes. And that made me just think about Akila just graduating high school and going to the Navy. And I don't know if she even knows the story, but the fact that she can hear this and then it comes from you. Do you get what I'm saying? And so that's going to hold more weight than if she had gotten that information from a teacher. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, and that's how things sometimes stick. That's why, wow. Hey, Cindy, blessed up love. Satisfaction equals reparations is the start. So, okay. I believe that we can't be satisfied and just go on. I do believe we have to bring light and recognition to real truths. Absolutely. And when I say satisfaction, I don't mean, because I don't think anybody is ever fully satisfied. I mean, so Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day Black, I don't know the speech by heart, but they'll come, we're there.
Yeah. We're there. Just by the content of our character, not the color of our skin.
And about the children coming together. We're there. We can't say we're not there. Do you get what I'm saying? So
I do. Yeah, I do.
So it may not be what we want it to look like, but we've gotten there. So what is the dream now? What is the vision now? Do you see what I'm saying? We have a Black woman vice president, biracial, however, they want to address it. We've had a Black biracial male president. But in the end, what is it that we still want? Because people still say he didn't do anything for Black people. Well, he can't just be the Black people's president. He's the president of the United States. Then you have, she's in office, but, they're not going to, you get what I'm saying? So it's like, we're talking about it, but what are we doing as grassroots on the ground to make a change? Anybody can get on a platform, have conversations, dialogue, get information out. But what are some things that we can physically do in our own communities to actually execute and make change? And I say that for others because I know the things that I do, but everybody isn't built to do the same thing. Everybody isn't built to go stand before Congress. Everybody isn't built to go stand before a board or speak or scream or advocate. But what are some things that even the I don't want to say the least of these, but those that are meek, those that I don't want to cause any trouble, things that they can do to help with progression?
One of the things King's also said, we see, and that's the thing about King. People can go back and forth with quotes on him all day. He talked about integrating his people into a burning building. I think we need to remember that as well. As much as we want to be judged by the content of our character, the question is, who are these people that were
being judged?
What is the character of the people that we're integrating alongside?
Hello. Hi, my name is Aisha. Nice to meet you. Like, that's how I feel. Because here's the thing. If I can rock with a Anglo-Saxon sister that thinks just like me, I'm about to use something that's probably gonna get me called coon again. If Rachel Dozell can teach me stuff about me that I don't know about me, why am I gonna have an attitude with her because I don't know about me, but she knows more about me than I know about me? Why would I not take the information?
We got to take the information. But I think then this gets to the point of you were saying, like, so what do we do with it? And I think that what we really want, nobody ever says it, we really want a social revolution. Because on one hand, we want white folks to treat us different. We want everybody to treat us differently. And I think that's where I would say it does come back to how we choose to treat ourselves and the things that we choose to celebrate and the things that we choose to vie for. I saw one of the comments, someone saying, the idea of celebrating is becoming a homeowner, buying and supporting Black businesses and sharing history. Like, these are all, how am I trying to say it? It's an orientation. It's something that not just that we want to do, but it's something you say, this is my goal and I'm moving toward it. And so that's where I think and the reason that's important too, is because what does that give us the opportunity to provide? What are we building and creating for those who are coming after us. So when we talk about celebrating, what can we do just at a day-to-day level? It really is this question of, and what can I do to make my community better for other folks of African descent? What can I do to make my workplace better for other Black people? What can I do to make, you know, the places that I attend, everywhere I go, what can I do to bring joy and life into people's lives? And I know that in some ways it's such a basic question. Other people and people in general can see this, you know, because there's going to be other folks who are going to have that perspective. And because their perspective, the way that they see what their highest and best is, might be different from your highest and best. But I think for us, it becomes a thing of how can I very intentionally try to create practices that I know are going to build up me and other Black people. And that's it. That's a very broad way of saying it, because it could be going to testifying before Congress. It could be going and giving waters out to homeless people. It could be going and, you know, giving books to people. It could be going into schools. It could be serving at your church. It's a lot of things in that way. But foundationally, like, we just got to build each other up, because we're living in a system and a society that's trying to tear us down. So the stronger we all are, the more likely it is not just that we can come together, but the more resilient we will be in the face of these things. And when the opportunity then does arise, like during the Civil War, for everyone to make a move in mass, if we move, we gonna win.
Can I say today is the first day that I finally understand the issue with the Confederate flag and the Confederate statues and African American people, Black people. Before today, I didn't get it. Before today, I was like, let the statues be. We can't erase history. It's history. But the problem became when white supremacy started going around, and Nathan
Bedford Forrest.
Yes.
Yeah.
His statue was moved, and his body is actually still entombed at the location. But he asked to be buried at Elmwood Cemetery, and his views changed towards the end of his life. However, you know, we ain't about forgiving, because, you know, we still hot at Biden, because he didn't want his children to go to school with Black kids, even though he did 2 terms with Obama. You know, folks still like, you know, he a racist because that man don't care nothing about us, even though his finger was Obama's best friend. I mean, if you got a hype man, I want a hype man like Biden, because he hyped Obama up all the time. Like I got your back. So if he was lying about it, I tell you, he got me fooled, because she was like, I got your back. How do we get past that though? Because even with this election, hearing people say he's a racist, it was like, the man was in office for 8 years with Obama. Why we didn't talk about that then? Why are we talking about this now? And then regardless, we gotta vote. And so it goes back to, I don't want to say the lesser of two evils or anything like that, but it goes back to still, we gotta figure out how to get on one accord to determine what it is we want. I.e., they say Trump did a lot. I don't know. He did a lot. I don't do big on politics. But even if he did a lot, is that the character that we want representing our country and our children? And that's not me speaking one with the other. I'm just saying, at what point do we make sure that the people that represent us, be it white, Black, any other color, look like something we want our children to be proud of?
I think this is where Du Bois' double consciousness idea is really important, because it's the whole you're both Black and you're an American thing. And so with someone like our current president, or even our previous president, the conversations we're having about them are not conversations we're having about ourselves as Black people. They're conversations that we're having about ourselves, perhaps as Black Americans, as part of a broader multicultural, multinational whole. And that matters. But the reason there's so much confusion within our community about it is because we don't know who we are to each other. I really think it comes down to, I truly think it's that simple, because 45 might have done this, he might have done that. Obama might have done this, he might have done that. Or maybe he didn't do this and he didn't do that. But at the end of the day, like, why are we looking? And this is the thing, I guess I'm saying, why are we looking to the federal government to determine who we are to each other?
Yes. And that's where I go with when people say as an oppressed, I'm not oppressed. You're going to stop calling me that. One, because to me, Words have power, whether they are written, spoken, sought into the air, they have power. I'm not oppressed. I'm not oppressed. I am free, and I do have power. And the thing is, it's a frustrating part for me is getting people to understand that the power does work for us if we learn it. Example, ACT. 2015, the ACT, back up. And this is why we, as Black people, cannot afford to say, I just want an area for just us. I don't want to deal with white people. I don't want to deal with Asian people. I don't want to deal with anybody else, just us. We can't afford to do that for several reasons. One, we have people with disabilities and different abilities. That's one thing. Two, we have the LGBTQIA plus community. That's another thing. Three, we have children that are in systems that don't look like us, but still deserve to be loved, brought up, and taught how to be a productive member of society. So we're just gonna roll with those three things, right? In 2015, the ACT changed their rules. Before 2015, all parents had to do was say, my child has ADHD, or my child has to take testing in a separate area. The processing speed is slow, whatever, and they need a little extra time. And guess what? Those kids got extra time. Mm-hmm. Guess who those kids were? Predominantly white kids, right? Up until 2015, that's the way it was. But then Black people started finding out, oh, wait, my child can get extra time. Oh, wait, they can take it in increments, which could help their score. So guess what happens? It's like every time we get to this line, because now we know the rules change. So now, if they didn't get any type of accommodations in high school and you can't show the documentation, then they can't get the accommodation on the ACT. Mm-hmm. So it's like the marker moves every time we learn how to use the system that's before us. And again, that's why it's imperative that we learn the systems, because we still have we have the power, we have the access. We live in a time where you cannot be denied your rights to things, but you got to know the steps, the chains, the command, what to do to be heard. And so that's kind of what makes it hard for me to think that, oh, we can just go over here in this area and live by ourselves. We don't need anybody else to help us. Then we don't know the system. Everything I learned about the system and how to turn down the system, it came from an older white woman that mentored me and poured everything she had into me. Me getting through high school came from some Black people, but also some white people, and those relationships and pouring into me. Do you get what I'm saying? So how do we get away from the narrative of this is ours and we need to, and I know part of it is just because we hadn't had anything that's ours per se. And so then we go into the whole cultural, what is it, appropriation or whatever. It's ours. Why you got to take that from us? Why do you got to do everything that we do? They still our music. They still are this. They still are that. But it's like, for me, those are the things that are so minor on the broad scale of things. And if we focus so much in those areas, we'll never be able to get to where we need to be or realize half of the things that we don't know or are missing, like information that you even shared today. How many of those people that saying those things knew what you shared today? I didn't know. Like, I'm over here geeked. Like, I'm about to go order me a Harriet Tubman t-shirt. Like, and I don't want the one with her hand out. Nah, I want one with her leading on me. You know what I'm saying? Don't.
Yeah, she'll have one with the gun.
Yeah.
She definitely had a gun with her almost at all times.
Even with that, let's talk about that too. The Second Amendment right. Just throw that out there. Her having a gun. I firmly believe that every Black American that can lawfully carry should carry, because it's our right to protect ourselves. And I think about the Ahmaud Arbery situation, and had he been armed, could he still be alive to fight for his life? Yeah, would he probably been locked up sooner? But would he still be alive to fight for his life? Do you get what I'm saying? So, okay, those two.
I do. I think it goes back to what you were saying about the ACT and about the goalposts changing. See, the thing I really have the worst problem with is when we do that to ourselves. But I would ask who runs the ACT, you know? And it's like, is it our folks? No. So if they changed it, I don't want to say, what does this have to do with us? But like, that's exactly the point, because the ACT, all of these, not just the college prep stuff, but the entire system. And this is the systemic issue, right? The system is designed to oppress people. But just as we go back to, you know, periods of enslavement, enslaved people had agency. We have agency today to choose how we're going to navigate these systems, which is why they're saying having information is so important, because it gives you greater power in navigating them as an individual. And I mean, all types of people can come and bless you. We just have to understand that this is why it's so important. It's not even to say it or to speak it into existence, but it's a system that wasn't designed by us. And so in that sense, it certainly wasn't designed for our benefit.
Yes.
And I think going to the Second Amendment, we must remember when I'd say like the United States is a settler colony from 1607 onward, they came, they were like, we're going to clear the land, kill all the people, and build our own society and economy in its place. And to do that, you have to have firearms, because that is how you figure out how to control a population. And so we, living in the inheritance of that, black, white, brown, yellow, everybody, red, like, that's why it's so important to be able to protect yourself in this country, because the origins of this country are in empowering individuals, citizens, to go and clear the land of people who they assume weren't supposed to be there. And yes, there's a racial component to it, because the idea is that white folks, that was supposed to be white men's job, to go and put down slave revolts, to go and stop indigenous rebellions, to go and fight a war. Like, that's why they have to carry guns, because they got to do things that you need guns for. So this is the other thing I was thinking. So in Texas, after Juneteenth, one of the things you wind up seeing, and not just in Texas, really across the South, a lot of folks, a lot of black folks start moving. They start trying to take their freedom. And what's the most important thing to them? Reconnecting with their families. That is the absolute most important thing. And so you have millions of people on the move, essentially, all at the same time. And what you see with some folks is some slave owners, instead of allowing their emancipated slaves to go, they kill them. But I say that though. No, I say it to say, like, and when someone's identity is predicated on enslaving you, when someone's sense of self is predicated on the power they think they have over you, in some ways, you have to figure out how to get away from that person to protect yourself, because their sense of agency is predicated on controlling your sense of agency. That's an abusive relationship. And it's not even just to say that, but no, I would say that systemically and structurally, that is a relationship African Americans have with the United States. Because since we do not, while we've been integrated perhaps into a greater political sort of power, what we see, I mean, you see it in Tennessee, you see it in Arizona, is a systemic actions by the state and systemic actions by white supremacists to make sure that we don't have the political power that we're supposed to have, to protect ourselves, to invest in our communities, to build each other up. And so we have to, instead of internalizing all this, like, oh, why are they doing it to us? We got to remember, they're doing this because this is how they live. This is how they make their money. This is how they teach their children. Like, and it's not everybody, right? Because we're judging people on the content of their character. But there's a subset of folks, and there's a subset of white folks who their reason for being is figuring out how to enslave and oppress other people. So Lord, just let me stay away from them, and let them stay away from me, and let me learn how, when we are around each other, how I can navigate them successfully.
Absolutely.
That's why I say it that way, because these two things can exist at the same time. But this is why we can't internalize things like, well, as soon as we figure out how to make it work, they change the goalposts, because that's the point. The goalposts were there in the first place to stop you from getting there. So as soon as you figure out how to get there, they're gonna be like, shoot, now we got to change the game again because they figured it out. it's a cat and dog game until we get them out of power.
Exactly. Totally agree. I totally agree. And to the degree of, again, this is why it's imperative that we know the things that we need to know and stop relying on the government to tell us the things that we need to know. We also know that some things are, well, a lot of things are systemic, but at the same time, as Black people, we can't afford to say, that's not my problem or issue. Another example, and I wish she was here because I really, but I guess she'll catch the replay. I talked with a young lady yesterday, and basically the statement was talking about how she's not had an issue with disabilities, so she can be empathetic or, oh, that's sad, but that's not a thing that I guess that she would focus on. But the issue with that not being, like, we can't afford to not focus on certain things, because in the end, it still comes back to affect us and the systems that were created to hinder us. So education for me is a big one. But guess what? I didn't learn the flaws of education until I had a child with a different ability. And that's what opened me up to the flaws of education with all of our children. And then we have to be willing to have these conversations. I volunteered for the pipeline, and we had a volunteer meeting. And one of the young ladies on that call, a white young lady, said, well, some of us have service dogs, but they're also trained to protect. Should we bring them? And I was just a volunteer. Like, I wasn't a leader. That was my first time on the call or anything. But some stuff I just, yeah, you know me. Some stuff I just can't let go. I was like, whoa. No, ma'am. If you have a service, like, it wasn't even my place to answer the question, but I answered it. I was like, no. If you have a service dog, that dog is for you. Please keep the dog with you at all times. Do not let the dog go. The worst thing you can do is bring dogs to a predominantly Black event, and these dogs are supposed to be security. Those two things don't even go together right now. So don't do that. But then that's me. I can have that conversation and still be okay with you, where you have some that the conversation could have really went left. Or another example was a lady that I love dearly on here, an older lady that asked the question, why are these kids wearing so many hoodies? Why do they wear so many hoodies? And I understood what she said. And I think other people in the chat understood what she said, but I still handled it in a way that was still respectful to her, even though the question could have been perceived as disrespectful, because I knew her. I knew she wasn't trying to be disrespectful. And so I explained it like Linus and his blanket and how you can feel protected with a hoodie, and I wear hoodies because, it's just something about a hoodie and feeling protected and blocking out the world. And when she saw it from that perspective, guess what she did? She sent me a picture of herself wearing a hoodie. She was like, oh, and I love this. And this is an older, but so if we're not willing to have those conversations because it's exhausting, or I'm tired of having to explain my issues to white people, and then it's like, how can I say it? In order for me to care about you, I have to know you. And for anybody to say that that's not, how can I say it? Because we have to think about the mindset that has been given. So for anybody to think, I don't have to know you to care about you, or I don't know, that's the thing. We have to be very intentional about forming true relationships and true alliances with those who don't look like us, because it's going to take all of us to make the changes that are necessary. And we can still celebrate each other's differences, i.e., dadgummit, St. Patrick's Day, i.e., what is May 5th is grandma's birthday, but what Cinco de Mayo. You see us out there more than you see the Irish and the Hispanics. So,
wow.
If you could talk on that.
Always down for a turn up.
Of course.
That's really what it is. But I think this goes back to what you were saying about African Americans in the queer community. A lot of the things that we have learned about our identities, especially when it's not a Black identity, but a lot of things we've learned, it's white folks teaching us. Mm-hmm. And so that's it. When I say that's an issue that we've created, in the sense that there needs to be not just Black queer theory, but like those things need to be celebrated. Those folks need to be celebrated. Same thing with the idea of Black disability work. Same thing with Black women. Same thing with Black, like going on and down the list. All these folks whose advocates are from outside of our community, if they're the ones who are teaching us what it means to be an advocate, I would actually argue in some ways what they're doing is helping to fracture our community, especially if they're coming from a dominant group. And that may not be their intention. You know, like you said, some people, they don't mean disrespect, but it has more to do with, because this is always going to be the question, who are we to each other? Yes. Who are we to each other? And we get messed up by not knowing who we are to other Black folks. Yes. It might be confusing in the sense of, well, who am I to this white person? Because really the question is, how are they to you? Like, how are y'all going to show your character to each other? Yes. But when it comes to who we are to each other, the people we live with, the people who we work with, the people who are next to, in that sort of sense, like the folks who we can't really get away from, that's where I think we need to put in the work. Because the more confident and comfortable I felt in myself as an African-American man, as a descendant of American slaves, you know, in all the ways, the complexities of who and how I want to identify, once I became better with that with my folks, it became a lot easier to talk to white people about the craziness that was going on. Talk to anybody, really. Because the point is, I know who I am. Exactly. And I know who my people are. Exactly. When you don't know that, that's when you start, I don't want to say acting out, but that's when you start trying to figure out, well, who can I be to these other people? Yes. What can I do to make them like me? How do I need to fit in this kind of way? Yes. But when you know who you are, you know, like, even though you may have some type of feeling about what someone is doing, it's not this thing where you come out of your character because someone else is coming out of theirs. Say that again. Run it back for people in the back. Run it back for people in the back. But it's true. You can't come out of your character because someone else doesn't know theirs. And so that's why at the base of all this, I'll just keep saying it, is we just need to know who we are to each other. And that's why we need to talk. When I say talk about our history, it's to make it something that you can call on, the way we call on scripture, you know? Like we need to remember all these things about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and all these people. Yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer, because like that, it's not just the struggle is our legacy, their resilience is our legacy. Yes. The resilience is our legacy. So I think that's how I've kind of understand, like, well, how do we figure out how to work with these people? What does it mean if you want to, because I understand wanting to be in predominantly Black spaces, but what I got from that is that had to be a space of healing. And if it's not a space of healing, I can see wanting to get out of it, right? Because we need to be healed. That's what we're on this life journey for at this point. But if we can create spaces where we can heal each other, where we learn who each other are, where we can empower each other to feel confident in who we are as individuals, then when we send these folks out into the world, all we're going to do is continue to build and make the world better for us and everybody else. Yes. And can I say that for me, I went through a period with my boys because I was very intentional about making sure my children had diversity. And then just maybe 2 years ago, I was like, whoa, I think I've set my kids up wrong. And they're, you know, because at that point, you know, we're at the height where Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, all these, you know, and seeing the Philando Castile, and he did everything that was right, but also being called again a coon because I saw the fear in that officer's eyes. And even though he was charged, it was like, okay, but the law says if he feared for his life, that's what he was supposed to do. How do we address the fact that he feared for his life when he really didn't have to fear? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's still a psychological thing that we have to address. Being Black, being a man does not make you a monster. And I had to apologize to my sons because I said, think about what, again, going back to words, and your mom
says this a lot, relanguaging, and I love it. I raised my sons in fear, saying, you already were born with two things against you. One, you're black, and you're a man. No, you were born with two wonderful things.
Exactly, two things for
yes,
two
you're
things
black,
for you,
and you're a man. You get what I'm saying? And so it's like changing that mindset of being black and a man makes you less than. No, being black and a man makes you powerful. It makes you who you
makes you
are.
enough.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that changing how we say things and see things. And again, I just said what was said to me, or what I heard my grandfather say, to his sons, his grandsons. Do you get what I'm saying? So
I do.
Trying to relanguage that, but then at the same time you get called a coon, or you have delusions of grandeur because the world doesn't see it that way. And it's like, I don't care what the world sees. I know what I see. And I think that kings, like.
No, because I feel very strongly about this. And that's why I'm saying it's like the idea of knowing who we are to each other. Because when I see other black men, the fear I feel, it's twofold, right? There's the fear that I have from the experiences that I've had with other black men. But then there's the fear that I have because of what I'm told they might do to me. Who's telling me these things, right? And so this is why it's like, I need to know what to listen to and what not to. The idea that you have two strikes against you by being black and a man is told to us by people who are actively trying to kill black men, by people who are actively discriminating against them in employment, by people who don't want them to own property or own homes, by people who are trying to figure out how to control black men's bodies, their sexuality, their day-to-day habits, their vices, the things that these aren't told to us by people who actually, when I say who actually love, what I mean is the people who taught us as folks who love black men that there's two strikes against you for having those things. It's not taught to us by people who love black men. And so we're passing things on in love that were taught to us in hate, which is why we have to start really, as Mom would say, relanguaging, but doing the work of undoing that and figuring out how we're going to teach each other, not just in love, but out of love. That it's not that you have two strikes against you. It's that other people may project onto you the fears they have within themselves. That's not on you to control. I mean, I really believe that's why I'm not going to stop wearing hoodies, because hoodies are very comfortable. And I can understand someone saying, why would you do it when you know how dangerous it is for you? I just want you to be safe. And you know what I want? I want for people to stop judging black men who are wearing hoodies as unsafe. I want white people to stop doing that.
Start with us, like as parents.
But it does.
We have to let it be and trust that it will become familiar enough for people to realize. I mean, because think about it. Now we're in a time where everybody's wearing a mask. You don't know who is going to come in and rob the bank. You just don't know. I'm going to go through these comments real quick and then I'll drop the link. Crystal says, yes, white privilege equals votes, equal land. Dre says the protection of the complexion. Crystal says, run me my money. I promise you that's how I feel now. Just run me my change. But even with that, think about the stimulus, and that's a whole new conversation. How many people still have some of that? A true level playing field. What does that look like, Dre? Freedmen's Bureau was 10 years ago? Then the funding was pulled.
Well, the Freedmen's Bureau, real quick, the Freedmen's Bureau was part of the reason it failed is because, so you have people like Douglass, everybody. Freedmen's Bureau is basically, we're going to help freed people figure out how to lift themselves up out of slavery. They had a bank and everything, the Freedmen's Bank. All these people put their savings into it. But what happened was white dudes who had political connections used the bank, the Freedmen's Bank, as their own personal piggy bank. They lost all the money in it. And all these folks wind up losing their money. And so it's like, oh, well, why does it fail? Well, it doesn't fail because Black Americans are, as folks would have said, well, we were corrupt. We didn't manage it right. It failed because white politicians allowed their friends to participate in corruption. It had nothing to do with us. And we can't take responsibility for that. Its failure is not our fault, but it is our pain. And that is something that we need to practice healing from.
Mm-hmm. And it has to be,
And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing from. And that is something that we need to practice healing We got to learn how to heal and to move forward with appropriate boundaries to feel safe so that, we can protect ourselves from being hurt again. But we also can't take responsibility for the things that happened that hurt us, because a lot of them weren't things that we chose to do or brought on ourselves.
Wow. I have so much to research. Dre says, you can give me my 40 acres so I can park my Mustang on it. Would that be a horse or a car, honey? AW, do you see reparations efforts by some countries in Africa, RE African Americans, as one form of reparations? Not full, of course. Should we be looking at reparations as a global effort? And that's a great question.
Just real quick, because I do have something that we Black liberation does have to begin with African liberation, in the sense that the continent has to be freed from colonization. Because if we have an independent Africa, then all of a sudden this is what you see with the post-colonial movement in the 1960s. All these African nations suddenly are independent of the British and the French and the Dutch and so on and so forth. At the same time, interestingly, that the United States is having a massively successful civil rights movement. These two things are not unrelated. The more powerful African nations that we have, the better off African Americans and other Africans across the globe in the diaspora will be. And so repatriation to the continent, I would argue, is kind of critical. That being said, it's not for everyone, right? But this is why I said you need people inside, outside, and against. We need people inside the continent. We need people outside the continent. We don't need to be against it, though. We need to be everywhere. And so for me, when I think of reparations, yes, there's certainly a cash benefit. And honestly, I think education or some type of extra voting privilege, not having to pay taxes, like I'm with it in those lines. But the freedom of movement,
taxes, especially on land that I own. Come on,
exactly. But the freedom of movement is critical for African Americans. We need to be able to move, because without movement, that's what really gets us bogged down into the oppressive relationships that people are really trying to avoid, the things that have caused us so much pain in the past. But if we have the ability to move to where our worth is going to be valued, and that does include being in Africa, then, it just gives us the ability to actually create individually and collectively the lives that we've been seeking for ourselves. So I'm a fan of repatriation movements. As that question was asking, yeah.
And so just recently there was a mountain or a volcano or something found somewhere in Africa that had a lot of diamonds on it. And the people that found it didn't get to keep it. It was like considered the countries, and they went in and took it over. And so my question is, in situations like that, even here in the United States, what would those individuals do? Because I'm like, they can't. I mean, maybe they could have staged an uprising, but there's not enough of them probably to overtake whatever government that came in and took that resource. But is that another way of keeping things down?
I mean, we can talk about the way that post-colonial African nations, many of their governments have been infiltrated and corrupted by the former colonial powers, by imperialist powers. So the governments don't always represent the people there. But I think of a place like Arizona. We have the Apache Nation out here. They're an indigenous nation. And there's this protest going on right now, Protect Oak Flat. It's this really, beautiful scenic area in the White Mountains, lots of hiking, so on and so forth. But moreover, it's part of their, sacred land for them. And the federal government and the state government are basically planning to blow the mountain up so they can pull all the copper out from underground, right? And it's just this question of like, but do we really need this? And so I think, what we as the descendants of African people really need is a government that's responsive, not to the corporations that are interested in developing our land, but to the people who live there.
Yes.
To the people who live there. Because the wealth of Africa should go to African people. But the way that it's currently constructed is that the wealth of Africa does not enrich those people in the same way that here in Arizona, the wealth of Arizona, right? Like Oak Flat, if they blow that mountain up, I'm not going to see a benefit from that copper. It's not going to put any money in my pocket. It's not going to make my schools any better. It's not going to make my roads any better. It's going to benefit some corporation. But that's why it's like that's why what we need is a mass. And this is what I'm seeing right now with Save Oak Flax. I pray that they're successful. I hope they are. It's the same thing with the pipeline. We need to have mass movements that say to governments, like, we are not okay with this type of economic production. And if it's going to occur, it's going to have to occur in ways that respect our right to be on this land and will protect it so that we can pass it on to the next generation.
Yes, absolutely. And when you just saying that again goes back to, we got to do better about saying, well, it's not me, so it doesn't affect me. Wrong. I remember when Standing Rock was fighting for their land and for the pipeline not to be ran through their burial ground, their sacred burial ground, as well as they were worried about their water. And Obama was going out of office and Trump was coming into office. And I stood with them as best I could from Memphis saying, no, stop, leave this alone. Not knowing that in 2020, I'd have to stand for my grandparents' land for the exact same thing, only to find out that very pipeline that I was trying to prevent for them, because we shouldn't take more from them, runs and dumps in West Tennessee. And so it's like, we got to stop thinking Flint, Michigan water is their water. It doesn't affect me. A lie. It does. And we have to, as people in general, start realizing this. I think about the white people that did live in Whitehaven, or even over though this area has pretty much been predominantly Black, but going a little bit further, I think about the fact that I'm in a home that my husband grew up in. My daughter has like let's just look at this. My daughter has autism, nonverbal. She has a duplication in her 22nd chromosome in the 12.3 region. I knew she didn't get it from me, but when he did blood tests, she got it from her dad. We're living now in the home that my husband grew up in. We understand the importance of legacy. So when my mother left me here and she made sure she left us wealth, I took it upon myself to be responsible because, one, I worked in a bank where in a predominantly Black neighborhood. It's not over here anymore, but there was a bank here, and I worked here as well as being an assistant branch manager. And I would see Black people come in with death benefits of 100, 200, 300,000, and it's gone in less than a year with nothing to show for it. So for me, it was like, how can I honor my mama? How can I honor my husband's or my mother-in-law? And how can I honor my children? So the only sensible thing for me to do was to purchase our home. When I purchased the home, this home is 50-something years old. It was $32,000 when my mother-in-law signed the mortgage papers over 50-something years ago, because she stayed here 54 years and we've been here. So this house is about 60-something years old. Guess how much I paid for it? The principal was still pretty much the same that it was the day she signed the papers. Now, my dad tells me about a lead program because we still have the windows that was in the house when the house was created. So, those windows ain't about nothing, right? And to try to buy some windows is like trying to buy a house, $20,000. No, I ain't got $20,000 just laying around. Lead program. They come in, they check our home, and guess what? There's lead in our home. How are we in 2021 and there's lead in our home? So now here I am thinking, my husband has this duplication. This is the home that he grew up in. Lead was in the home then. Lead is in the home now, only for me to find out with the water, the pipeline, that lead can change your DNA. And so now I'm sitting here thinking, where the genetic specialist was like, well, it really doesn't mean anything. But then when I research online and I see people with this same chromosomal duplication that she has and the features that they have that are the same, and I see those features in my husband, there is something there. But you have to find people willing to dig enough. And then that goes back to the whole term that I just learned last year about environmental racism. So it's like, how do we fix that? You know what I'm saying? And so part of it for me was like, you know, thinking, okay, I'll move back to the community. But here's the thing, moving back to the community, just talked to somebody just yesterday. And I was like, you know, because I have a young man, I said, I would love to do a boot camp one weekend just for the young men in my neighborhood to talk about how you speak to people, not, you know, speaking down on them, but making sure they know how to shake hands, making sure they know how to look a person in the eye, making sure they understand the value of who they are, making sure they understand that respect can get you so far in life, places that a degree can't even get you. And the person that I was sharing it with said, you should charge something for that though. $5. How can I charge in a community where I see there's no money to give? How can I charge for that? And so for me, that gets frustrating with my people, because don't get me wrong, I know that we have to make money, but some knowledge we just shouldn't be charging for, especially if there is a lack of bodies in the community to help them. Because most of these young boys are being raised by women, not men.
And so that's what's frustrating. But I think this gets to a question of we can't, how am I trying to say it? I'm moving away from the idea that we can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. But I would say more so we can't use their methods to build our own. And so the idea that you can pay everybody, like you said, or have people pay in a community where financial capital is not readily available, that's unfair. But there's other types of compensation that can be provided. And I'm a huge fan of the idea of sweat equity in the sense that, you know, you may not have $10, but do you have an hour?
And I'm with that, because the whole thing is like our neighborhood is still, we still have the beauty of elders. Like to me, the elders are beautiful. I don't care. You can cuss me out. Somebody said elders shouldn't cuss. They didn't know Beatrice Hardaway because she cussed you out in a heartbeat, baby, and say, "Are you hungry? Do you need something to eat?" You know, but she gonna tell you how she feel off top. You know she ain't a problem. You need some money. You need some gas. Like, no, ma'am, grandma, I really just wanted to come see you. Put your money back in your shirt. But we're blessed to still have that. And they have so many stories. To hear my mother-in-law say, the other piece about this home for me that makes it home and make me love it is the fact that she made $12 a week. $12 a week. And I'm looking at the house and I told her, I said, y'all were rich. And he was like, no, we weren't. He was like, my dad built the top part of the house and my dad laid this. And then for my husband to have lost his father at 15, but his father taught him everything he knows. My husband is Bob the Builder. He can build anything. And so it's like, again, we're lacking the bodies that's willing to come in. Auntie says, amen. Thank you for giving this history lesson to us. Keep it going. So much work still needs to be done. I agree. CeeLo says, I agree. Dre asked AW, can we move globally before establishing locally? But you answered that by saying you honestly feel that we have to deal with the, I don't want to misconstrue your words, but the things that are happening in Africa before we can expect anything. But
I mean, this is kind of to your point where it was like, you had to be concerned about Standing Rock, so Standing Rock could be concerned about Boxtown. And I think it's in that way that we need to be concerned about the diaspora, because that's actually our concern. Like what's going on the continent, that's our concern. Panama, Black Panamanians, Black Colombians, Black Venezuelans, Black Haitians, you know, that's our concern. Shoot, Black Indians, like from the continent of India, Black Indonesians, Aboriginal Australians, that's our concern. So I don't see it as an either or sort of question. I see these things really as being united. By being concerned about the diaspora, we're really concerned about ourselves. And by creating local institutions where the diaspora can come, we're strengthening it at the same time. These two things have to work in concert with each other. That I think is the way that I'm trying to get it. That's what I'm saying. Some of us are going to go back. Some of us need to be expats. We need African Americans on the continent in the same way that we need Nigerians, Senegalese, Ghanaians. I'm gonna go down the list. South Africans, we need them here in the States because they're gonna have some information and knowledge connection that's gonna help us. We just got to build those bridges.
Build the bridges and be willing again to have conversations with people that don't look like us. One of the things that benefited, or that I remember from being in a multicultural church, was we were doing a generation feed, I believe this was called, where we packed food together for communities here. However, I'll never forget the marketing. I was like, who the hell? And it was church, but I literally said, who the hell let this pass? On the front was a little black boy that had a spoon and looked like he was hungry. On the back was white people preparing it. And again, who the hell thought this was okay? My son attends this church. This is not a representation of him. But had I not been there, we wouldn't have been able to have those conversations. And so for me, my biggest frustration is I don't want to say nothing because I don't want to bother nobody. No, I don't care about ruffling feathers, because if you love me and I love you and we have this relationship, I should be able to tell you that this is some bullshit and it needs to be run back to print so we can put something better out. And if we can't have those type of conversations, then our relationship isn't genuine. We
don't need to be together, because I mean, it's the reconciliation question. This just isn't even with white folks. This is with everybody. We have to be able to reconcile not just the things that we disagree about, but like the things that hurt. We got to be able to reconcile our past issues. And I mean that in the community. Queer and straight, male, female, old, young. We all got to figure out how we're going to work together. That requires us having a conversation where we can reconcile some of our differences and move forward with unity.
Crystal says, I have the capacity to hire for my company, and I do lean towards Black candidates. They are qualified. So my way of celebrating Juneteenth is to ensure I don't downplay that I am pro-Black. And can you just touch again on that being pro-Black does not mean or equate to anti-white?
Yeah.
I think that could be a whole nother segment within itself. But I think we as Black people, I don't think white people have that. I don't really, so my white people, please know this is in, but I don't really care what their thoughts are about me saying I'm not anti-white, because I know that I'm not. I know that I have genuine relationships. But for my people, it kind of stings a little bit when you try to make me believe I can't be pro-Black and not be anti-white. You get what I'm saying? Like, I can do both and okay with it. Not to mention, look at the color of my skin. I'm not the darkest person in the room, which means, and you've seen my mama, so somebody did something to somebody, which we know, we know the history, but yeah.
But I think this is, so Haiti is an interesting place. You got, during the revolution on the island of Saint-Domingue, this is back when Haiti was a French colony. Basically, the enslaved army, they beat the British, they beat the French. I think, who's the third one? It might have been the Dutch. No, it was the Spanish. 3 imperial armies try to come to Haiti and re-enslave everybody. And they're like, nah, you can't do it. And eventually it gets to a point where it's just the Black folks who are on the island, the at this point, emancipated Africans, and the whites who had been enslaving them. And they get rid of everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean, like, they said they're killing all the white people. Like, they get off the island. You can't stay here anymore. And when Haiti is declared as a Black republic, the white folks who stayed no longer were racially identified as white. They had to become Black racially. Even, no African ancestry, but because Haiti was a Black nation, they basically were given the right or the privilege or the being of becoming part of a Black race. And I think that's where it's like, as beautiful as the Haitian Revolution is, it's also a learning point. I can understand the anti-whiteness that when you get to the end of the Haitian Revolution, I get why it had those anti-white sentiments, because they had come to the conclusion of who they could and couldn't trust. And so it really was a question of how do we keep this nation together when all these white folks are trying to get the British and the English and the Spanish to come and invade us. But the flip side of that is, and I don't mean this in a mean way, what it did was it isolated Haiti in the long run, because in the broader global economy, because what anti-blackness does it is the underpinning of a lot of modernity. But in that sense, anti-whiteness, I mean, that's essentially saying we don't want to play with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so Haiti today is one of the poorest nations in the world because they were intentionally excluded. But the basis of their exclusion, because I'm trying to think if there's other places that had successful revolts. They just occurred differently. Haiti was the first one. But if you think of British emancipation, decolonization in Africa, not just, but the independence movements in Latin America, they didn't have that same anti-white veneer to them. They didn't have that same impetus behind it. And so those nations after emancipation didn't experience the same sort of alienation from the broader global economy that Haiti has experienced. So when we talk about that difference between being pro-black and anti-white, it's like you can be pro-black and you can be anti-white, but it's a question of, especially when it comes to anti-whiteness, not just what are the consequences you're willing to bear, how is it going to benefit the situation that you're trying to create?
Exactly.
Because I'm thinking of what Crystal's saying. I'm gonna just end it real quick. Just, you can be pro-black, but if you're hiring for a company and you're so pro-black that it winds up messing up the company's bottom line, then have you benefited yourself if then all of a sudden your company goes bankrupt and you're out of work? You know what I mean? Like, what is the purpose of what we're trying to do? So we got to be one, and the other, that's in some ways a personal choice, but it's just, can you accept the consequences of it?
Yeah. And the consequences for me of just being pro-black, I don't see it benefiting us as a whole. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to always be here. You're not going to always be here. So what is it going to look like for our children? Somebody has to bridge the gap. Somebody has to be willing to talk. I should never forget my coach telling me about his dad. And when, and he's white, but he's like a dad to me. And I put that out there so that I could paint this story. His dad worked at, I believe it was Mananzas. He could tell the story better. And it was during the riots of right after Dr. Martin Luther King passed away, was killed, assassinated. And he would have to sneak the kids to and from. Now, this was a white man that was with the movement and was trying to still help and teach his children. But because of the anger, and when I say his children that were Black, he too still had to make sacrifices and put himself on the line to ensure that these children were safe. And I think sometimes I don't think we can not acknowledge those people even in Black history. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying.
And it's not to take away from Black history. It's to simply show that, another person I can use. The guy, Lord, he works my nerve. He's building the school. He has a school in New York. It's a charter school. He's a Black guy.
Jeffrey?
What's his
Jeffrey Canada?
He was on the Breakfast Club.
I know.
What is that dude's name? Dr. Umar.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Umar Johnson.
Baby, when I heard half of the stuff he said, all I could literally say is he full of shit. Like, I had no better words to say. There's no way that you could know. This man said, my school could be finished, but I need a Black electrician that's willing to volunteer his time. Because he didn't want anybody white to touch it. So you're saying that it is to the detriment of these children that they can't move forward because you hadn't gotten a Black electrician to come forward and volunteer their time. But if a white one comes, you're not going to accept it. Then is it really about the kids, or is it really about you just trying to say, I was the first Black person to create an all-Black school that was built by only Black people? Do you get what I'm saying? Because I don't see how this benefits the kids. And
that's interesting. I understand it, like, in the sense of from an ideological perspective, but I think this is the point about ideology. I mean, it falls apart. It's not practical, like ideology isn't practical. And on a practical level, is your objective to run a school, or is your objective to I mean, enrich other Black people. And those are still two different things. I'd say it's easier to teach hate than love. And that's kind of the point, that at the end of the day, we need to focus on teaching pro-Blackness, because we're teaching how to love each other and ourselves versus teaching anti-whiteness. Because, I mean, it's just easy, but it's cheap. And it doesn't really get us anywhere to learn how to hate people. Yes. We just got to learn how to love.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm happy to hear they recently moved the bodies weeks ago. Crystal said Nathan was moved last week. Crystal said, great show. Dre says it's easier for people to respect someone that they know intimately. Absolutely. What other platforms and presentations can we find you, Dr. Pratcher?
So I'm a member of the Phoenix Emerge Collective, Emerge News Collective, basically Black millennials who are, trying to elicit conversations of substance that are going to benefit the Black community here in Phoenix, build each other up, and let each other really practice how we need to speak to each other so we can have conversations like this lovingly, caringly, and they're going to move our community in a better direction. I'm also on the board of directors at the Phoenix George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center. It's a Black History museum that was created from the Black high school in Phoenix. Phoenix used to have segregated high schools. Mm-hmm. And so after desegregation, they shut the high school down for a long time, but the alumni eventually went back, bought the school, and turned it into a museum. So I have the great honor, really, and privilege of right now just trying to help develop, curriculum, programming, just doing everything I can to help make that center the premier institution for higher education, or not higher education, but the premier institution for the Black experience in the Southwest. And finally, it's my personal website, professorpratcher.com. You can find out all the information of things that I'm doing there. Generally, if I have, blog posts, some writing, research projects, so on and so forth. I try to stay active in my scholarship, and I do have a modicum of a social media presence, but best way to get a hold of me is, or to follow me is to follow the website, pay attention to what's going on at the museum, and check out Emerge News Collective, because I'm just kind of putting my stuff out there everywhere. So
with the Emerge News Collective, do you guys have other chapters, or is it?
It's just a Phoenix thing right now. It's very grassroots. You can find us on Facebook it's at PHX Emerge Collective. So @PHX Emerge Collective. And if you follow us, you'll be able to see all the programming that we've put together so far this year, and hopefully see some of the things that we're going to do in the future.
My chick, she's here. We just talked about you, Houston Bread. I shared a little bit from yesterday. Freddie Silver, you said it doesn't matter. Please share, because again, this is a platform for the uncomfortable but necessary conversations. And just if you could expound on that, we would be happy to address it. Do you have about 17 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to drop the link for anybody that wants to come up. I thank you so much, Dr. Pratcher. I'm gonna have to call Dr. A. If you're good with it, I'm good with it. But I want to use that doctor because I just think that anybody that goes to school to get all that, they deserve all the elemental P's that go with them. Absolutely. While I'm waiting to see if someone wants to hit the link, I will put these in the description box. But these earrings come from You Love Shani. She is a YouTube content creator on YouTube. She has some amazing items. Let me stand up. This shirt I have on says Black Lives Matter. Say their name. Give me a second here. I don't know if you guys can fully see it. It's a fist. And it has the names of those who have been killed innocently. Say their name, Black Lives Matter, and it's by Black and White Apparel. Read the Heart of Philadelphia. And behind me here, I have a candle that's called, Lord, it's something with the C. I forgot, I'll put it in the description, but it's also by Sincerely Yours, Nadia A. These are all Black owned businesses. Juneteenth is definitely a great day to support. And so I will link those in the chat as well. Let's see. Hi, Houston Bread. Freddie Silver did not comment any further. The link has been dropped. If anybody would like to come up, Dr. Pratcher, Dr. A, like walking away with this Cohumbi ferry raid, baby. I have like June 2nd. We should I got a couple of dates that we need to add to our calendar. I'm with you on that. And that would be June 2nd, December 8th.
Yeah, June 2nd. June 2nd. I'm trying to think if there's any others I think are particularly critical.
There was something else I wanted to ask you. I wrote the question down. Two things. So with us, knowing that we have Native American heritage, but not knowing exactly where it comes from. We know where it comes from, rather. We know that it comes from our grandmother. The question is, how do we find the tribe? One. And then two, because that's the root. You get what I'm saying? Well, how do we find the tribe? That's one. And then two, you stated, well, three questions. So one, about that. Two, how do you feel about like the different ancestry DNA test? And then the third one is, you said what we need to be most concerned about is making us whole again from within. What does that look like to you?
So first, there's a lot of genealogy experts out there, people who are great at tracing genealogical records. It's something that we all have to do, honestly. And I mean that, though, in the sense of, in this country, most people are lucky, Black, white, brown, whoever, if they can trace their family back 6, 7 generations, just because of all the movement and everything that's gone on. It's really incumbent on us, I think, to try to trace our ancestry back to Africa if we can, in the way that, Alex Haley was able to do with Roots. But at the very least, we need to figure out the ways that we're connected to people so we can have a better understanding of something that I would say is that, while this is certainly all stolen land in that sort of sense, there are claims that we can make on this land. And it's not simply just because we came and worked it. I mean, we're one with these people, So many folks are blended into what it means to be African American. If you go back to the 18th century, a lot of people enslaved are actually Native Americans who are captured and sold into slavery. In fact, the last people really to be emancipated in the United States are here in Arizona. They're people who are held captive by indigenous nations as enslaved people. And so the 13th Amendment, it doesn't just free us, but it frees them as well. And so by going and using genealogy to trace our ancestry, what it does is it shows us the connections that we have with indigenous nations. Now, those nations have their own rules and regulations for determining who is and who is not part of their community. But what I do think it does show, at least for us, and what it gives us a sense of greater confidence in, is the right that we do have to be here and inhabit this land. That it's not, a question of, are we colonizers too, or da-da-da-da-da. But no, like, we're part of, all the people who are in America are probably part of our people. Secondly, what was the second? You're going to have to remind me. What was the second question?
The second question was, what are your thoughts about the different ancestry DNAs?
They freak me out. This is me being honest. I'm freaked out about all these times when it's like, let me give my DNA to anyone in particular. But that being said, I think it's really beneficial because, someone in my family did one, and the results came back where it's like mitochondrial DNA was from China or something. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I stopped paying attention to it. But then I started looking, like, just the way my hair.
And did you, hello?
I know. And so this is what I meant, where I said from everywhere, like, everyone's going to be represented in us as African Americans. So I think, to me, I'm not super into the DNA stuff because it essentializes race in a way that I'm uncomfortable with. We certainly need to know our genetic history, and we need to know, genetic markers that could dispose us to certain types of illnesses. But I know who my people are. I feel confident in that. And there isn't a DNA test that's going to tell me otherwise. And so in the final question, what was it again?
You said we have to make us whole again from within.
Yes.
What does that look like? One, where do you feel we lost it? And then what does it look like? And that kind of, just for the celebrity sake of things, it makes me think about Monique in the video she did addressing women and wearing bonnets and house shoes and night clothes outside, and talking about how during the Harlem Renaissance time, and even before that, when you would see pictures, even when our ancestors were in what would be considered rags, they still made themselves presentable. They still wrap their hairs nicely and like, don't play the semantics, because a hijab is not a bonnet, what does that look like, the making us whole again?
We've lost a lot of religious and spiritual practices. We lost a lot of stuff through the Middle Passage, and we gained a lot. People who are like Islam, we have to remember that it's an African religion, but in the sense that a lot of people who came over here, they were Muslim as well. It's not, this idea that people who came to the United States through the Middle Passage lacked the knowledge of Christianity or Islam or any of these other religions. It's inaccurate. So what we've been struggling with, though, I would argue, is how to get a sense of ourselves when we're living in a system that's actively trying to strip us of that knowledge, or even more so, prevent us from getting it. So for me, if I had to think about what it means to be whole, it has to start with like spiritual wellness in that sort of sense. And I would say like human education. But for me, my education, because I've been educated, and I very much appreciate the formal education I received. But some of the greatest lessons that I learned came through my practice of martial arts. It came through my practice of yoga. It's come through my practice of meditation. It's come through my practice of, I don't even know what you call it, just hiking, being in nature, but figuring out who I am in relation, not just to the people in this society, but to the broader universe that I'm a part of. Yes. Because we're all coming from the same energy in that sort of sense. Yes. And so really figuring out how to be at peace with who I am in relation to the universe, in relation to the people around me, and in relation to myself. That's where I think I found that inner peace. And it had to come by determining not just what my moral values were, but what my spiritual practices needed to be to fill me with the strength to stand strong in what I believed in. And that's where I think we need to kind of start at.
And so how would we disseminate that information to the community to encourage that more? Because, we were told yoga was demonic practices. Grounding, like it took me searching spiritually because some stuff just, again, Desi having autism taught me a lot. When people say, oh, it must be a full moon, I just used to think people were just saying that. But no, if the moon can change, a full moon can change the tide of the ocean, what do you think it does to the liquid in our brain? If grounding, I didn't know anything about grounding. And then I read about it and I went outside and I did it one day, sunny day, just went outside barefooted. But if you think about it, when we were kids, what do? We ran around outside with no shoes on. It wasn't called ground. Maybe it was, we just didn't know. And so, we've gotten so refined, we don't walk outside without our shoes on anymore. But sometimes just your feet on the grass allows you to reconnect and your body to recalibrate. And those are things I just don't see how you can have any religion without metaphysics and understanding our bodies and understanding the world and gravity. And even now with us being in Mercury retrograde and what's happening with the planets and how that will affect us. And I think when we start learning those things, because the other thing, the farmer's
almanac, yeah,
demonic. What? How did they?
It's like any information that they don't want you to know is demonic. And by they, I don't even necessarily mean white folks. I mean the people who are trying to instruct you. But that's the problem. That I really think that's the problem. I understand, staying away from things that we might call witchcraft, things along those lines. But we have to reclaim our own understanding of how to get into heaven, of how to live a good life, of the power that's here within us. And it can't be predicated on somebody else telling us that's not going to work for you.
Right.
That's what, and that's what I mean when I say, like, we have lived in a system that's actively tried to miseducate us, to keep us from learning, keep us from understanding the knowledge, not just within, but going out and finding new. But I remember this one time I went on a hike, and it was in the middle of the school day. It was in February, and I'm hiking, and I go up to the top of this mountain. It's really beautiful, and I see these kids just hanging out. They couldn't have been older than 12. And I'm thinking, like, what are they doing here? But then I looked over them, you know, they're indigenous. I think they might have, I was over near one of the reservations in the valley, so they may have been like Maricopa or something like that. And I'm thinking, this kind of makes sense, though, because what would I expect a 12-year-old to do if they weren't in school? And like the idea of some 12-year-old just going and walking to the top of a mountain, sitting there and looking, like, I would want my son to do that.
Right.
Because that sounds like you're really in tune with nature. And then you start realizing that this is these folks' indigenous home, like this is their spiritual land, that they have a connection with this place that goes back centuries, if not millennia. And it's like, and that's how you know yourself. That's how, and that's why the whole Protect Oak Flat, that's why all these come stand in rock, because they understand their relation of themselves to that land. We are still struggling with that. Who are we in relation to the land? Who are we in relation? We're still struggling as African Americans to figure out those things. But our spiritual practices have to be ones that certainly, you know, reflect the religious teachings that we've come up with, but really get into this idea that we are one with the universe. And how are we going to understand our relationship with the universe, despite living in a society that's actively trying to distract us and miseducate us, so that all we know is who we are in relation to those in charge. That ain't who we are.
Absolutely not. Not only that, you know, Oprah has been saying for the longest, speaking into the atmosphere. Okay, well, the Bible says power of life and death is in the tongue. You know, the Bible says speak those things that be not as though they were. You know, so is that not manifestation? Is that not affirmations? Is that not saying I am healed? My body is, you know, your mom has me, and I praise God for her on this, Louise Hay. Like my brain, I never understood how my brain processed. And I try to drill this with my kids all the time, and even people that I meet. Knowing you, if you don't know who you are, you're going to go with the wind. But if you know who you are, your core, and when I say your core, our core matters, not only in a literary sense, but even the core of our bodies. If the core of our body is off, we're off.
Yep.
So if our core thinking is off, we're off. We're off. So we have to know what our core values are. And guess what? My core values may not be the same as yours. But in order for me to be, socially aware, physically present, mentally, aware, I got to know what my boundaries are, what my limitations are, what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are. And a lot of times we don't take time to know who we are. We depend on society to tell us who we are. And that's why I hate labels. I hate labels. I hate norm references. Who determines the norm reference? Who did you reference them against? Where did you pull all this information from? What part of the country, or what kids did you use to determine what a normal 3-year-old is going to do, to determine what a normal you get what I'm saying? And I think for me, especially even with school, when my nephew graduates next month, Aisha is done. Desi will not be in a public school. Desi, may not, she's homeschooled now. I don't know that she will even go to a private school, because you can't teach my child what I can teach my child. And I didn't know that before now. Because, they say school they have to have that socialization. How many times did you get to, I don't know about you, but all the whoopings I got told, I ain't sent you to school to find no friends so you can be able to be talking. I sent you to school to learn. Then if that's the case, why did I have to go to school? I could have learned at home. I did a lot of learning at home. I learned how to plant. I learned how to harvest, sow, reap, harvest, all that. And so, we can wrap it up. I'm gonna let you wrap it up. I have enjoyed you. Please check your Cash App if and we'll talk more after, but I'll make sure I bless you because you have given us your time and I definitely appreciate it. And I just pray I can get you back again because there's a lot to talk about. And I think I found my my safe place. Like this is the thing that gives me joy. Having these type of conversations with the hopes again that these conversations they can be held with those who don't look like us and they can feel comfortable enough to come to get the information and know that we're not going to beat them down for wanting to understand and even for having a difference of opinion. I've always said I'll talk to the head of the KKK as long as we can be respectful.
I do like respect. Respect is a really important thing. I had to learn that there are some people I didn't really care to talk to, but that's me. And I think that, you know, kind of, I do want to thank you for this. I just really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the stuff that I've learned. It was a long and solitary journey in that sort of way, but having the ability to go and share it with people who you care about. Like, I mean, I think that's kind of the point of all of it, you know, that there's the self-edification that it's like, oh, I learned all these things for myself, but now it's like, what do you do with it? And what you do is you try to give it back. So I just appreciate having the opportunity to share what and how I've learned. And I think if I had to sum anything up, I know I said the same thing over and over in that kind of way, but the reason I really appreciate this platform is because it gives us a chance, you and I, to figure out how we're going to talk, who we are to each other, what it is that we believe, how to further and deepen our relationship. And I think by showing people how to do that, and by showing folks how to do that, by having these types of conversations on topics that we all need to learn, it gives us all collectively the ability, by joining and listening and participating, to get a better sense of who we are to each other. And by each other, I do mean as African Americans, but even as we expand out, just as people. And how can we be the best people to each other that we can without the coercion and the exploitation and all that negativity? How can we learn to live with each other in peace, joy, and harmony, and happiness and love? So I appreciate having the opportunity to do that. I hope that what I've been able to share brings clarity to some folks so that we all can, you know, feel a little bit better about who we are today as we decide to spend our Juneteenth however we so please.
Absolutely. And I said to someone yesterday, I said, when someone sees me, I don't want the first thing that they see is Black or woman. I want the first thing to be they see a human. And then you can see me as Black and a woman. And some couldn't understand what I was saying. And so I broke it down in the most extreme way. I said, if I were to be burnt from head to toe and a white woman were to be burnt from head to toe and we were on the operating room or in the operating room, truthfully, it could be a male. Depending on how bad we're burnt, you may not even know the gender. You're not going to be able to tell the color. So that's why I say, see me as a human first. Then you can add the other things to me.
The social things.
But humanity is what matters. And that's what we've lost across the board, even when it comes to us. And since it's Juneteenth, the last thing that I will leave out on, and then I'll surely let you close. Awesome live. Thank you so much, Doc. Beautiful and productive conversation. Thank you. Again, his Cash App is here. If you guys would like to bless him for this, I will definitely bless him on behalf of the platform. The last thing that I will say, because it's Juneteenth, and I want y'all to go out and have an amazing time, right? And you know, my closing is always, I'm sending lots of love, peace, joy, blessings your way. Remember, you're responsible for your own happiness. Take this with you. Black on Black crime is a myth, okay? It doesn't exist. It's a myth. Walk away with that one today. So that's all I got. I'm going to throw the deuces to you. I'm going to let Anthony say Dr. A say his goodbyes, and then you and I can talk once I close it out.
Absolutely. Just, I ain't going to take long. Thank you all for the opportunity to come and share this with you. If anything, just make sure you go out and love each other. I've been listening to a lot of Stevie Wonder, and the thing I got from him is God is love, Allah is love, you know, even wherever we go, at the end of the day, this is all about love. So try to take today to love each other. love each other the best that we can, and love each other in ways that's going to help us as we all move forward. Peace.